Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 852. Leon's Despair. 2. Clank, clank. Sparks burst into the air as heavy metal struck against metal, the sharp clang echoing throughout the cramped room. Each hammer blow rang out with force, reverberating off the tight walls and rattling the tools hanging nearby. Heat rolled through the space in thick waves. Clank! The forge roared brighter with every strike, flames flaring and twisting as they licked higher, casting wild shadows across the walls. Standing amidst the raging flames was a broad, towering figure. His back was massive, shoulders wide and solid as iron beneath the firelight. The heat did not seem to faze him. Sparks struck his skin and fell away harmlessly. Long red hair flowed down his back in heavy strands, catching the orange glow of the forge. His silhouette loomed against the blaze, steady and immovable, as if he belonged to the fire itself. Clank, 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 clank. The hammering did not stop. Even as the flames surged higher and the heat intensified, the rhythm remained steady. Sweat streamed down the man's massive frame, tracing along his muscles before dripping onto the stone floor with a faint hiss. Still, he did not slow. His movements were precise and relentless, each strike measured yet powerful. It was as though time no longer applied to him, as though the outside world had ceased to exist beyond the anvil and the metal beneath his hammer. Step. But the rhythm broke at the sound of a single step. The man's movements came to an abrupt halt as the glowing weapon before him started to cool down. He raised the hammer again but soon dropped it. "Why did you show up here?" His deep voice reverberated across the room, only to be replied to by a cold voice. "I'm checking up on your progress. How long until the relics are created?" The man didn't reply. He simply stood before the raging fire, his muscles bulging as he tightened his grip over the hammer. "You!" There seemed to be a lot that he wanted to say, but eventually he stopped himself. "It'll be done soon. This isn't something that I can accomplish easily." That's good," Emmett replied, the flames flickering across his pupils as he slowly turned away to leave. But just as he did, Veltrus's voice echoed in his ears again. "You've changed." Emmett's steps came to a pause. "Though you may not realize it, you've changed. You weren't like this before. It's like you've been consumed by something. I don't quite know what it is, but everyone has realized it. Torin in particular is concerned about it. Just what are you planning? What did you see? Let us in on it. Aren't we? Just do what you've been tasked to do." Emmett cut him off, his eyes turning hazy. The old man's expression shifted slightly as he opened his mouth, but Emmett spoke before he could get another word out. "Change sometimes is necessary to ensure survival." These were the last words he said before leaving the room. "Julian." Bringing me out of my thoughts was Evelyn's voice as her steps paused and she turned to look in my direction. Just one look and I instantly understood. She's coming for us. There was no need for us to look for the God Hunter. In that case, the next destination is clear. Veltrus's domain, the Land of Fire. "We're really going there?" and asked, her expression especially grim. I looked at her and nodded. "Yes, we must go there. That was where Noel was locked up. To save him, I had no choice but to go there." Brushing her long red hair back, Aoife looked at me as she spoke. "Honestly, it's not like I fully understand what you're trying to do since you've yet to explain the entire situation to us. But do you think it's even possible for us to achieve your goal? Considering our current situation, I don't know if it'll be possible. From how I see things will only get harder for us." Her words made everyone pause as they all turned to look in my direction. I could see that everyone appeared to share the same thoughts as Aoife, but had yet to voice them for one reason or another. In hindsight, their worries weren't without merit. It's true. Going to save Noel sounds like suicide. There was no way we'd be able to do much at our current strength. We were still far too weak to face the likes of Cithrus or even his followers. Dawn. Despite this, it wasn't like I didn't have a plan. I would have never have proposed something like this if I didn't have a plan in mind. It was dangerous, but it was doable. Furthermore, with the possible addition of Delilah, the chances of succeeding were even higher, granted we wouldn't meet Cithrus. Still, I had my own way of dealing with him. Let's set the goal aside. At our current pace, we probably won't be able to reach the land of fire anytime soon. And as pointed out the obvious as he turned to look behind. In the distance, the outline of Isilra appeared. According to my estimates, it should take at least 2 months. And that's granted we don't meet any trouble along the way. I knew. This much I had calculated in advance. Realistically speaking, it should take us half a month to reach the outskirts of the land of fire. However, this was the mirror dimension we were talking about. The terrain was different than how it was in the past, with many incredibly annoying things along the way. There also existed monsters, and there was no guarantee that issues like what we encountered wouldn't arise. 2 months was a safe estimate. But that's fine. I was rushed, but not to the point where we needed to exhaust ourselves in order to reach the place. In fact, the slower things were the better. Well, that was my original plan anyway. All of a sudden, I raised my head to look up towards the sky. The others followed as well, as they seemed to have sensed the same thing I did. Almost immediately, the expression of everyone present tightened. Something is coming. Kira's words brought a sudden tension to the group as everyone readied their weapons, the mana inside of their bodies churning out. Despite their exhaustion, they all looked ready to fight. However, the closer the entity became, the grimmer their expressions became as they felt the overwhelming pressure coming from the distance. Shit! Kira's expression was especially grim as a dark pool began to form beneath her feet, her body starting to sink into the ground beneath. Evelyn's expression was equally as serious as lightning began to crackle around her body, and the air around her started to condense. I looked at her in surprise, getting a sense of the power that she was summoning. Could that be? This felt a lot like the integration of her domain. No, it's not quite that, but the power behind that attack is quite frankly incredible. The air around Evelyn warped as power started to accumulate around her. Zere crack. The hair on my body rose at the sight of her attack, and just before she could continue further, I pressed my hand against her shoulder and stopped her. Hey, you can stop. Oh. Evelyn's body stiffened momentarily, her head turning to look at me. I glanced back at her briefly before lifting my head and looking into the distance, toward the source of the pressure. At first, it was nothing more than a dot in the sky, small and indistinct against the vast gray sky above us. As it drew closer, the shape began to take form. A massive silhouette emerged from the haze, floating high above the land. Its outline grew clearer with each passing second, revealing an enormous body suspended in the air. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. A vast shadow spread across the ground beneath, swallowing hills and trees alike as the creature continued its silent approach. As its features became clear, everyone's expression changed as the mana inside their body retreated, and Kira muttered, "That's a dragon." Leon finished the words for her, his eyes entranced by the sight in the distance. It's a dragon. What had seemed far away only moments ago was already nearing us, cutting through the sky with dominance. In mere seconds, it was above us. Its massive wings beat once, then again, each movement sending powerful gusts crashing down onto the ground. Dust and debris spiraled outward as the wind pressed against my clothes. It hovered there, immense and imposing. Then its gaze shifted. Slowly, its eyes settled on me. And then, "Human," called out to me, forcing me to smile and greet back. Pebble. Swoosh. The dragon's massive wings beat again. This time, the wind was even stronger, slamming into us like a physical force. The ground trembled beneath the pressure, dust and loose debris whipping past in violent spirals. I did not move. I remained where I stood, staring up at the enormous dragon before us as its dark scales glimmered under the light of the white sun. Staring at its large frame and powerful pressure, I couldn't help but think about the past and how the once lethargic cat that would constantly bicker and get bullied by an owl had grown into a fine dragon. For a moment, the world seemed to come to a complete still as the two of us stared at each other. But the silence was shattered almost immediately. The dragon's enormous frame began to shrink at a startling pace. Its vast wings folded inward, scales compressing and dissolving into shadow as its colossal body rapidly condensed. In the span of a heartbeat, the sky was empty. A small black cat dropped from above instead. It shot downward rapidly and reached me in an instant, landing lightly on my shoulder. Its paws settled there with surprising familiarity, claws barely grazing the fabric of my clothes. Golden eyes blinked once as it looked at me. "I've been waiting." That was all the cat said before nestling over to my shoulder, almost as if it was trying to take in my scent that it seemed to have forgotten. "I've been waiting," it repeated again, its voice softer. I opened my lips to reply back, but right as I was about to speak, a certain voice reached my ears. "Hey, Evelyn." My attention fell on Leon as he shook her shoulder. Then, grabbing her attention, He pointed at the cat on my shoulder and spoke. "That's a dragon." His eyes gleamed as he looked at the cat. He looked like a child who had just seen the world for the first time. Hey. Dragon. Chapter 853. Leon's Despair. 3. It was an unexpected situation, but it was also a very welcome one as I managed to reunite with Pebble. "How were you able to find me?" This was something that I was curious about. Even if I'm no longer a will, it doesn't mean that the bone in your body is fake. From the moment you entered the mirror dimension, I was able to sense your presence. That was the explanation that Pebble gave me. But in that case, I looked around. What about Almighty? I quite missed that tree. Why are you asking about that useless tree? The black cat's eyes narrowed as it looked at me. I merely smiled in return. Seems like their relationship was still the same. The owl also sensed you, Pebble added, not looking very satisfied. In fact, there also seemed to be something that it didn't say to me, but very quickly, its chest swelled with pride. But unlike that owl, I am much faster. I was able to get to you quickly, while that useless tree will take longer. That makes sense. Pebble was a dragon, after all. It made sense that Pebble would be faster than a tree. But then again, the last time I traveled with Almighty, it was pretty fast too. In that case, it probably won't take long for Almighty to arrive. I thought about waiting for the tree, but Pebble leapt off my shoulder and looked back at me. Should we get going? HM? Are we not going to wait for Almighty? I thought Almighty was coming here. There's no need to wait for the tree. Pebble licked its paws. But then, as if realizing the action was unbecoming of a dragon, it stopped and frowned. That stupid tree will arrive soon. Just leave someone here to wait for the tree. We can save more time if we go now. In hindsight, this wasn't a bad idea. I was already tired of staying in this place. Furthermore, with the addition of Pebble and Almighty, we'd be able to get to the Land of Fire in no time. How long do you think it'll take for us to reach the Land of Fire? Several hours. Pebble replied as a strange pressure began to form around its body, spreading toward us while its figure morphed and shifted. Wings burst from its back, and a large shadow fell over all of us. Leon's eyes grew especially wide as he nudged my shoulder and pointed. A dragon! Oh, I looked at Leon, then at Pebble as its figure shifted back into that of a dragon. The simple flap of its wings sent a strong gust of wind through the air, making my clothes and hair flutter wildly. From the moment it revealed its true form, I didn't wait and hopped onto its back. Let's go. We should be able to reach our destination quickly. I beckoned everyone else to follow. Besides Aoife, Kira, and the rest, and An stood rigidly, their eyes fixed on Pebble. They'd been oddly quiet since their arrival. Then again, they probably hadn't expected me to have a dragon as a companion. It's a long story. I'll explain to you two later. Thankfully, even in a daze, they both managed to get onto Pebble's back. The last to try and get on Pebble's back was Leon, still mumbling, "Dragon." Finally, I can fly on the dragon again. At this point, I could practically picture what was going through his mind. He was probably imagining himself striking some heroic pose on top of Pebble's head, arms crossed, looking down on the world like a smug overlord. I knew this because he had tried it before. I felt a little bad, but, Leon, I need a favor from you. Leon froze, his head stiffening as he looked at me from below. Almighty will be coming soon. I need you to wait here for it. Leon's expression drained of color, his eyes wide and trembling as he looked at me. I could practically hear his thoughts. No, what are you talking about? You. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this moment? I know. I nodded. But sacrifices must be made. Thump. Leon got on his knees. What a loyal knight. Thump. Thump thump. Leon? Why are you banging your head against the floor? He even started to pound his head to show just how much he respected me. I smiled and tapped on Pebble's head. I knew I could count on you. Swoosh. Pebble's wings began to flap, sending a strong gust that made Leon's clothes flutter wildly and his hair scatter in all directions. But as loyal as ever, Leon didn't look up. He kept his head lowered, staring at the ground. I felt touched as his figure became smaller and smaller. I even waved at him. See you later. Then the dragon took flight. Swoop. In just the blink of an eye, Leon's figure faded from view. The strong wind from Pebble's speed startled everyone. But I quickly used my mana to create a small barrier around us, and soon, everything settled. For the first few minutes, everyone gazed down at the ground in awe, the frozen land beneath us rising in sharp spikes of ice. Their transparent surfaces gleamed under the sunlight, creating a stunning visual. Even I couldn't help but feel the same. Despite having flown on Pebble's back before, the sight never failed to amaze me. But soon, I began to feel a series of eyes fixed on me. You! Kira gave me a strange look, glancing back, presumably toward the spot where we'd left Leon. I fail to believe that you couldn't have let Leon come here. I also doubt that the tree you were talking about would need to wait for Leon. Why did you not let him come? He seemed to really be looking forward to it. Kira's words seemed to echo the sentiment of everyone present. However, I had a very good reason for this. He's already been on Pebble's back before. And? The last time he was here, he started posing while looking at the ground beneath like he was some sort of king. On second thought, maybe you were right. MHM. Aoife nodded next to her. That tree must need Leon's help. I'm sure that's what it is. Yes. Even Evelyn found herself agreeing. As my gaze swept over Evelyn's body, a thought surfaced in my mind as I shifted my attention between Kira and Aoife. It's worth a shot. The two of you turn around for a moment. I want to try and see if I can do something. I'll explain later. For now, just turn your backs against me. Aoife and Kira paused, turning to face each other. But as they noticed the sudden shift in my demeanor, neither of them asked anything, they just turned back around. Evelyn gave us a brief glance before closing her eyes, as if she understood what I was trying to do. I was able to do it to Evelyn, but I wasn't able to do much. That's why I need more practice, but for now, I need to start doing something for the two of them, or a similar situation will happen to them. By a similar situation, I meant the time when the outer beings took over Evelyn's body. If that were to happen again, I wouldn't know how to stop it, especially now that they were aware of my existence. Yeah, I need to take care of this issue now before it's too late. Thankfully, I wasn't as helpless as I was in the past. I knew what I had to do. Outer rune of containment. Taking a deep breath, 2 magic circles appeared in my hands. As my palms pressed against her back, the circles began to rotate slowly. I focused on keeping my mind calm, breathing steadily, while memories of the past with Evelyn replayed in my mind. Unlike the past, this process was much easier. With the spell already created, Outer Hand, everything became easy. This was the medium I had crafted to channel the source power, and as the 2 magic circles in my hands fully formed, Aoife and Kira's bodies stiffened. What are you? Black veins spread across their faces as their bodies began to twitch and squirm. I took another deep breath, feeling the drain on my mana, and forced the words out. T tried to resist, but that was easier said than done. Their bodies trembled more intensely, and the black veins on their faces became even more pronounced. With each passing second, the mana inside me drained further. If not for the fact that I had already recovered, this would have really been extremely dangerous for me. Especially since I could feel the darkness inside their bodies trying to reach me, almost as if it was trying to consume me. But I didn't let it as I clenched my teeth and kept my hands firm. KKH. Ugh. Kira and Aoife both groaned in pain from the strain of my actions, but all I could tell them was to resist as I poured even more effort into maintaining the spell. The result appeared almost immediately. -1, -1, -1, -1, -1. The calamity meter, which had been nearing its breaking point, began to retreat for the two of them. The decrease wasn't rapid, but it was noticeable. I could see the black lines around their bodies starting to fade, slowly growing fainter with each passing moment. J. Julian. But the physical toll my actions were taking on them was becoming more apparent as their screams grew louder. And both stood, looking our way with worry, but Evelyn raised her hand to stop them, her expression steady. I also knew why they were acting like this. Aoife and Kira weren't just screaming, but their bodies were physically breaking down as blood began to seep out from their orifices. If I carried on further, then I'd create irreversible damage to them. That was why I had no choice but to stop here. HAA. The two of them slumped onto Pebble's back, their faces ghostly pale, and the black lines that had marked their skin finally began to fade. I was no different from them, exhausted and drained, and I had to prop my body up with both hands. Slumping back, I took several deep and uneven breaths as I tried my best to stabilize the mana inside of my body. I think this is my limit. I was able to reduce their meter by about 5% each. Although this wasn't much, it was just the start. If I continue like this, I should be able to get rid of it completely, hopefully. Ideally, that was the goal. However, I knew that ideals were just ideals. There was no way things would be this easy. But there was no time to spare. Taking another deep breath, I looked at the gray sky above. As my mana started to accumulate again, I closed my eyes. A certain rune appeared in my mind. I think there are a few hours until we reach the destination. I might as well try and see if I can upgrade my spells. Opening my eyes again after my mana recovered a decent amount, I sat back up and extended my hand, forming a new magic circle. Without second thought, I began to fiddle with the spells. By the time I reached the Land of Fire, I wanted to see if I could evolve all of my spells. It had been a very long time since I had evolved my spells. Chapter 854. Land of Fire 1. Swoosh! Pebble's enormous wings beat once, the powerful wind scattering in every direction as its massive body gradually slowed to a halt midair. This is as far as we can go, human. Pebble's voice reached me soon after. I feel the presence of something powerful up ahead. Any more and we'll be in danger. MHM. For even Pebble to deem it powerful, whatever was up ahead was likely destroyer ranked or above. Most likely it was a primordial rank. Looking down, I could already see that the ice was long ago replaced by a thick and dense forest. On the other side of the forest, there should be the Land of Fire. Inez spoke as he looked down. At the same time, he took out a map and looked at it. I'm not quite familiar with this place, so I can't exactly say where we are, but if I had to make a guess, we're nearly on the outskirts of the Land of Fire, likely in the forest of Melanchines. Melanchines? This rang a bell. Oh fuck, not those things. And covered her face while ruffling her hair. I've dealt with those things before. Although they aren't quite strong, they're incredibly annoying. Once they lock target with you, it'll be impossible to escape them. Do we have no choice but to go through here? And looked at Pebble as she asked. Pebble flapped its wings once before its large head tilted slightly. It is the closest way. Ah shit. And looked at me. You. But her words came to a sudden halt as a figure popped up next to me. Looking exactly like one of the Melanchines she was aware of. Her expression changed. There's one right here. I know. I extended my hand to stop her before she could do anything. This one is with me. I recalled the will, and only then did and realized that it wasn't exactly a Melanchiny. This is the second time that you've shown me something like this. What exactly did you do? It's a bit complicated. I'll explain along the way. I tapped the top of Pebble's head. Understanding at once, its massive wings gave a heavy beat, and its large body began to descend. As we dropped lower, the forest below grew sharper and more oppressive. Towering trees loomed over everything, their bark dark as charred bone. Their thin branches twisting upward like sharp spikes clawing at the sky. The closer we came to the forest, the heavier the air felt. But above all, as I looked into the forest, I started to wonder just what sort of creature was staying inside that even Pebble had no choice but to land. I hope that it's on the same level as Exahurl. Granted, I wouldn't need to fight it. In fact, I had long been aware of the existence of such a powerful monster within this vicinity. It was one of the main reasons why I wanted to come here. But that was merely on the premise that I wouldn't need to fight it. Having already used the Heracleus's eye, there was no way I could deal with a creature of that level again. The best I'd be able to do would be to use Eye of Existence, and hope that I could buy enough time for us to leave. But that was the best-case scenario. As Pebble descended from the sky, we all hopped off its back. It's quite a lot warmer here. I can feel the heat too. I'm already starting to sweat. We may not have noticed the weather change since we were in the sky. But the moment we came down, the heat became obvious. All of a sudden, I'm starting to miss the cold. Kira commented while taking off some of her heavier clothes. I did too while looking towards the distance. Leon should be arriving soon with Almighty. In the meantime, I should try to think more about my next steps. Other than that, I was also quite exhausted. There was some success, but I had yet to fully improve all of my spells. There was still a little bit of work for me to do. Still, it wasn't like I wasn't able to upgrade one of my spells. In fact, I pulled out my status screen. Julian D. Iviness. Level 81. Tier 8 Magician. EXP 0%, 37%, 100%. Profession. Magician. Type. Elemental Curse. Type. Mind. Emotive. Spells. Perfected type spell. Emotive. Sadness. Superior type spell. Emotive. Anger. Perfected type spell. Emotive. Fear. Advanced type spell. Emotive. Surprise. Advanced type spell. Emotive. Joy. Advanced type spell. Emotive. Disgust. Intermediate type spell. Emotive. Love. Superior type spell. Curse. Outer Hand. Advanced type spell. Curse. Condemnation of Alacantria. Intermediate type spell. Curse. Nightmare Hex. Intermediate type spell. Curse. Immersia. Intermediate type spell. Curse. Severed Sense. Intermediate type spell. Elemental. Water Breathing. Advanced type spell. Body. Gliding. Skills. Innate. Foresight. Innate. Ether Weave. Innate. Veil of Deception. Innate. Cosmic Suppression. Innate. Mana sense. Innate eye of existence. The main issue that I had when upgrading the spells wasn't just the runes. Fiddling and rearranging the runes was hard in itself, but the problem was that one needed to have a proper understanding of the spell for it to upgrade. That's probably why in the past I needed to fully grasp the spells before they would upgrade. The same thing goes for this. Thankfully, I already had a good idea of how most of my spells worked. The ones that I needed to work on the most were the intermediate ranked ones. At this point, they were simply too weak for me. My next goal was to upgrade them. What do you think the situation in the Land of Fire is like? Anaz suddenly asked me. When I turned my head, Anaz was already sitting on the ground, taking out a small snack as and sat next to him, grabbing a chunk of his food. I'm not sure. I've never been there. However, and did mention to you before that lately there's been a situation with a second son, right? Oh, right. I had almost forgotten about it. Anaz continued. I haven't been able to find out much more, but looking up at the sky, I still can't see a second sun. Do you think that might have been a lie? I'm not sure about that. In reality, from the moment that a second son had been mentioned, I had already gotten a good grasp of what the situation was like within the Land of Fire. In fact, I even had an idea for the reason behind the second son as a certain figure came to mind. My chest grew heavier at the thought. If it was really him, then... Aside from that, I also heard that the Land of Fire is a lot different compared to the other places since they value strength and power above everything over there. My expression paused after hearing Anaz's words. What do you mean by that? There's only one city in the Land of Fire, and spoke for him, taking another bit of Anaz's food as he frowned and moved away from her. But as though she was an octopus, she clung to him and continued to steal his stuff while speaking to me. Everything else in the Land of Fire is essentially a desert. However, in such a rural place, almost everyone within the city is extremely powerful. Amongst all of the lands, the strongest warriors probably belong to the Land of Fire. This was new to me. To judge each other's strength, they have a sort of ranking for the top 100 people of the entire land, and those who make it to the very top will be able to meet with the city's governor. I don't know why you want to go to the Land of Fire, but if you have a goal, then this might be the best way for you to find what you want. Possibly. Honestly, probably not. I couldn't just go to the governor and ask where Noelle was being kept. Could I? There was no way they'd tell me. For that reason, I wasn't that interested in this ranking system that they had. Ah! Suddenly, I snapped my head toward the distance. I rose to my feet at once as the ground trembled beneath us. A violent rumble split the air, and thick roots burst from the earth, tearing through soil and stone as they writhed upward like serpents. Then it emerged, almighty in all its glory as red leaves began to shroud the sky. I smiled at the sight. It's been a while. The tree stood imposingly, its presence even more pressuring than pebble. The air thickened around it, bending inward as though the forest itself bowed in submission. I started to move, but the tree suddenly convulsed. Bert, and it spat a figure onto the ground, its form shifting once more and condensing into an owl as the owl flapped its wings and sat onto my shoulder. Human, Almighty quietly spoke, giving me a small nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back. It's good to see you again. From the looks of things, you've gotten stronger than the last time that I saw you. Passable. I am still far from primordial rank. However, the owl's eyes narrowed as it turned to face the forest. I feel a terrifying power hiding within the forest. I am aware. So what are you planning? I am planning on crossing the forest. The owl's eyes narrowed further as it looked at me. However, it didn't say anything after that and turned its attention elsewhere. I followed its gaze, and that was when I took notice of Leon. He was sitting by himself, touching the cracks in the earth with a lost look. I opened my mouth, but soon closed it. Let's go. Since he was here, there was no need to delay things further as I headed into the forest. The others followed. Swoosh! A subtle breeze drifted through the forest, slipping between the countless trees and stirring their bare branches into a soft, restless flutter. With the passing wind, a figure emerged at the forest's edge. She stood in silence, dark eyes narrowing as the earth beneath her started to darken. I can feel it. They're close. However, there's a troublesome existence here. Her eyes narrowed further, the darkness in her eyes spreading further as she fixed her gaze towards a specific area. As if also noticing her presence, the forest seemed to come alive as all the trees fluttered at once. But it wasn't for long as the woman blinked slowly. The rustling stopped, and the presence faded. Without another word, she pressed her foot against the ground. It shot across the earth like a tidal wave, swallowing grass and stone alike as it surged toward the forest. Wherever it passed, color drained away, and the towering trees were slowly enveloped in a creeping, suffocating black. Watching the black take over the surroundings, she tried to take a step forward, but stopped, her head raising to look at the forest. For some reason, She found herself unable to move. But above all, why? The woman raised her hand and looked at the ring on her finger. Why did she feel a vague sense of familiarity within the forest? Taking another step forward, she stopped again. After which, the darkness that shot ahead retreated as she quietly stared at the forest, her eyes narrowing further before she disappeared from the spot. Chapter 855. Land of Fire, 2. Boom! Thunderous cheers rolled through the Sunscour arena, crashing against the towering walls of ashen stone that encircled the colossal battleground. Tens of thousands packed the towering stands, their voices rising into a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the arena. Cloaked nobles, hardened mercenaries, desperate gamblers, and bloodthirsty spectators leaned forward from their seats, their gazes burning with anticipation. All eyes were fixed on the two warriors clashing in the center of the pit. The fight between the two had gone on for several hours, both battling until their mana completely dried up and there was nothing left in the tank. Their breathing came in ragged bursts as they staggered across the cracked arena floor. Despite the numerous injuries in each other's bodies, neither man allowed himself to fall. Bang! Fists swung through the scorching air. A brutal hook landed with a sickening thud, snapping one fighter's head to the side as blood sprayed across the sand. The other answered immediately, driving his own fist forward with the last shreds of strength left in his battered body. Bang, bang! Blow after blow echoed through the arena. Blood dripped from torn knuckles and split lips, splattering across the fractured earth beneath their feet. The once pale sand had long since turned dark and muddy, soaked through with their blood. And still neither warrior backed down. Wah! Kill him! Kill him! The depraved shouts of the crowd reverberated in all directions as the two warriors battled it out with their lives on the line. Neither seemed to be affected by the shouts. Their entire attention was focused on the opponent ahead. This was no regular battle. It was a battle that went beyond simple survival. This was a ranking battle. Ranked 73 Kalak versus ranked 68 Simola. The victor between the two would determine their overall ranking within the city. Fists were exchanged once more. Two heads snapped back at the same time. But this time, clenching his fist once more, Kalak's entire body squirmed and popped as it doubled in size. His eyes turned completely red as he threw a terrifying punch forward. Bang! There was nothing his already exhausted opponent could do. The moment Kalak's fist landed, Simola's head exploded. Blood spurted in all directions as the crowd thundered once more. Wah! Their depraved shouts filled the grounds once more as Kalak wobbled back, trying to keep his large frame from dropping to a knee. That was also the moment everything turned silent as Kalak turned his attention towards the far end of the arena, where a figure sat, his eyes drooping as he looked in Kalak's direction. Unlike the other spectators, he was different. His frame wasn't large, and his white robes hung loosely around his body, accentuating his grayish hair. But above all, just a simple look in his eyes was enough to make one submit. Kalak was no different as his head lowered, a primordial fear clawing at the deepest part of his being and causing his body to shiver continuously. He was well aware of the identity of the man in front of him. How could he not know? Ranked 1 Tharvek. The Dune Conqueror. Not bad. Tharvek's soft voice reverberated across the surroundings, causing Kalak's body to tremble even further. For defeating ranked 68 Simola, you shall be bestowed the 68th ranked. Congratulations. The surroundings thundered once more, but Kalak kept his head lowered. The surroundings turned silent after a brief moment as the figure at the center of everyone's attention stood up, flicking his hand. Kalak's head lifted as he raised his hand and caught a small flask containing a deep red liquid. You have earned the right to baptize yourself. Kalak's eyes gleamed as he stared at the red liquid within the flask. Once again, congratulations, ranked 68 Kalak. Boom! The surroundings boomed once more as the crowd erupted into cheers. Tharvek didn't stay any longer. Upon handing over the liquid to the victor, he calmly walked out of the arena. But as he did, he eventually looked up towards the sky, towards the two suns that hovered above. His lips curled into a smile. The moment we stepped into the forest, it felt as though we had been transported into a completely different world. The trees twisted together, their branches spiking upward as the dark bark blended seamlessly with the darkness around us. There was something about the air that felt suffocating, as if something was staring right at us. This place gives me the creeps, Kira muttered while looking around, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, while everyone else tensed. I activated Mana Sense and tried to detect anything. This is a forest where Melanchonies are supposed to exist. If I activate Mana Sense, I should be able to see if there's any of them hiding. But, nothing? This was a development that took me aback. From the very start, I had expected there to be a lot of Melanchonies or even monsters. However, regardless of which direction I looked, I couldn't feel a single thing. It was as if we were the only ones to exist within this dense forest. But how does that make sense? I don't detect anything. I shared my findings with the others. There's nothing near us. No Melanchonies or monsters. I also don't sense anything. Evelyn spoke up, her eyes opening as lightning crackled within her pupils. There's nothing near us. This left me unsettled. Was my information wrong? Or were the monsters here somehow able to hide from us? What should we do then? As Aoife asked, Leon walked ahead. What else are we supposed to do? Let's go ahead. MHM. I agreed with Leon's assessment and followed behind him. At the same time, I kept Mana Sense active as I scanned the surroundings. However, even as we walked for the next dozen minutes, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. The trees grew denser, their bark thicker, and the darkness deepened. After some point, I started to lose track of the people around me. Thankfully, with Mana Sense active, I was still aware of where everyone was. But the same couldn't be said for them, as Kira's body suddenly glowed as flames emerged. As light flourished from her body, Aoife's gaze flicked towards a certain direction. Wait! She pointed in a certain direction. As we all followed her line of sight, a pair of chains met my vision. Those are? Aoife approached the chains and grabbed them. They look like chains. She pulled the chains apart. They're quite durable too. Like, very durable. She had to exert quite a bit of force before they snapped in half. Why are chains here? Inez asked as he looked at the chains in Aoife's hands. Anne, who stood next to him, also took a close look at the chains before responding. If I'm not wrong, they probably belong to those from the city in the Land of Fire. Maybe they were trying to hunt for food? Food and water are quite scarce over there. That makes sense. Aoife continued to mess with the chains before tossing them away. We all proceeded ahead. But the more we walked, the more things we noticed. From chains to a piece of clothing to helmets and so on. It really does look like a lot of people were sent here. The deeper we walked, the more such items we saw. However, despite that, there appeared to be no single human within our vicinity. The same was for the monsters. Above all, the temperature started to rise the deeper we went. From hot to cold, Julian, you really can't expect the mirror dimension to be a normal place. Hearing Kira's gumble, I nodded. This really did feel quite uncomfortable. But just as I was about to reply to her, something caught my attention in the distance. A light. My heart skipped a beat. We're almost there. Everyone's steps hurried as we headed towards the light as it pierced through the numerous gaps created by the trees ahead of us. I still remained cautious as we continued ahead, but even as we drew closer and closer to the opposite end of the forest, nothing came to attack us. By the time we arrived at the forest's edge, greeted by the numerous dunes stretching across the horizon, a strong heat washed over our group. Wow! The heat was unlike anything we felt before arriving. It almost felt scorching, prickling at my skin as though I was standing in the middle of an oven. I had no choice but to coat my body with a layer of mana to endure the heat. I'm actually quite surprised that we were able to pass by the forest so easily. This is the first time we've gone through something without encountering any trouble. Stop jinxing it. I replied to Leon's words as he kept looking at the forest, seemingly waiting for a monster to jump at him at any given moment. It wasn't like I didn't get him. I was also at a complete loss. But this works out for the best. Still, don't let your guard down. I looked at the scenery ahead, my eyes eventually lifting to the sky. The moment they did, my expression changed subtly as I took note of the second sun hovering above, its presence just as bright as the other. In fact, I couldn't even tell the difference between the two. So it wasn't a lie. And mumbled, similarly looking at the second sun in the sky. There truly is a second sun. But how is that possible? Aoife looked up, her brows furrowed tightly as her eyes squinted under the bright lights of the sun. Don't you find it strange too? Before coming here, even when we were in the sky, there was no sign of a second sun. However, the moment we pass the forest, a second sun magically appears above? Something is not adding up. Evelyn's words had merit. Everyone else started to talk with each other, trying to figure out what the second sun meant and how it was possible for it to be there. At first, I was also confused, but the more I looked at it, the more I started to understand as my heart started to beat faster and faster. Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! It was so loud that I felt the pounding inside my head. That's no sun. Everything became clear to me in the next second as a knot formed inside my stomach, my expression quickly changing as I activated Lament of Lies to the maximum, not holding back a single thing as sweat poured from the side of my face. Julian? What's wrong with you? Where are you? That's not a second sun. I shouted, my expression tensing further, almost as if something had set its sights on me, its gaze hovering over our general direction as the mana inside my body circulated faster, beginning to drain more quickly than before. But I had no choice but to do this. There was no other option. Because, slowly lifting my head up, what greeted my line of sight wasn't the sun. No, it was an eye. A large eye that seemed to overlook the entire world. Chapter 856. Land of Fire, 3. The moment realization dawned on me, it felt as though a terrifying pressure closed in from every direction, plunging me into a smothering depth that made it hard to breathe. I felt suffocated. Even when I used lament of lies to hide my body, I didn't feel safe. That sun, that gaze, it continued to linger in the sky, looking down in my direction as if it had detected something. Holding my chest, I took deep, harsh breaths, forcing my mind to remain calm while the others hurriedly tried their best to hide their presence. The gaze continued to hover. It swept my area and the area around us. It kept looking as I held my breath. Did it see me? Did it spot me? Shouldn't spot me. But what if? Sweat poured from the side of my face as I tried my best not to make a sound or move. I just stood completely still, waiting for the gaze to sweep away. And soon, it did. The sun's attention fell elsewhere, and the suffocating pressure that I had felt faded. But even as the gaze left, I remained alert. I was still unsure of whether it had spotted me or not. What the hell was that? Anaz's face was abnormally pale as he looked towards the sky. The others were no different, finally taking note of the abnormality of the second sun in the sky. Is that a monster? It's not. I shook my head while looking away from Anaz and back towards the second sun that hovered in the sky. If there had been any doubts before, there were none any longer. That wasn't a monster. That I belonged to someone. Someone that I knew all too well. Dawn. Or to be more precise, Atlas. He was here. Looking. Searching. Perhaps, he's long been aware of the fact that I was going to come here. In that case, things have become a lot more troublesome. But despite this, I had to continue. The current me couldn't deal with Atlas, that much was true. In every possible sense, rescuing Noelle was going to be an incredibly difficult task, and I understood that. I knew all of the risks. That's why I decided to do it. Because I felt like I could do it. Let's go. Taking out a cloth, I covered my face. At the same time, I suppressed my mana to an acceptable level while also changing my clothes. The others did the same, understanding my intentions. Do you think this will be enough? No. I shook my head while replying to Leon. That's why I'll keep using my skill to keep us hidden. However, once we find more suitable clothing or get a better understanding of this place, we can try to blend in better. The good thing was that this place was massive. While the eye had hovered in our direction before, I was certain that unless we did something out of the norm, it wouldn't notice us. There was simply too much land for it to cover to focus on all the little things that were happening. I don't know how the conditions of this place are, but keep your guard up. This is the mirror dimension after all. There's nothing about this place that is friendly. Taking a step forward and feeling my feet sink into the sand, I looked ahead as a sea of dunes stretched before my eyes, rising and falling in long, rolling shapes that seemed almost frozen in motion. Their wind-bent peaks curved like waves caught mid-crest, overlapping until they blurred into the distance. Above them, the gray sky hung low, one of the pale white suns half hidden behind the numerous dunes as its dull light washed the landscape in muted tones. The wind skimmed across the sand, carving delicate ripples along the slopes of each dune, so that faint, wave-like patterns shimmered across their surfaces. As treacherous as the mirror dimension was, a hidden beauty still lay within it. One just had to look hard enough to find it. At first, the journey wasn't hard. The heat was strong, but we could still manage. This much felt manageable. But the more we walked, the more we started to realize that things weren't as simple as this. It first started with a faint hissing sound. The sound carried through the wind as though someone was whispering in our ears. But the more we continued, the more we realized that it was something else entirely, as our vision started to turn darkish yellow. Ugh! I'm starting to lose my vision. My skin is starting to sting. Just what the hell is this? It's a sandstorm, Leon muttered, placing his hand over his face as he looked ahead. However, he soon realized that there was no point as he struggled to see more than a few meters ahead. I was no different. Hiss! The hiss of the wind grew sharper, rising from a whisper to a constant, rasping roar that swept across the dunes. Ugh! Sand lifted into the air in thin veils, stinging against my skin as the gusts cut through the open desert. My vision began to blur, the horizon wavering as grains of sand drifted across my eyes. On the other hand, the distant suns, once bright and clear, faded into little more than pale white smudges, trembling like ghostly dots against the dark yellow sky. With every passing moment, the wind grew more piercing, howling across the dunes and bending their ridges and making it harder and harder for us to move. I thought would be all, but rumble, rumble, careful. There's one coming from below. The sand beneath us suddenly shuddered, the smooth surface collapsing inward as if the desert itself were inhaling. A deep ripple tore through the dune, grains cascading downward as the ground split apart. From the opening, a massive maw burst upward, scattering sand in a violent spray. The sharp edges of numerous teeth flashed within the darkness of its mouth as it lunged straight toward us, the force of its emergence sending waves through the surrounding dunes. Unable to detect it with mana sense, I was caught completely off guard, but still managed to keep my bearings as Leon took out his sword. His eyes turned pitch black, and several stars faded from his eyes. Swoosh! His movements were fast. With one swift movement, he managed to cut the monster in half. But, swoosh! Swoosh! Things were far from over. The moment he cut down one, several others appeared as the sand beneath us continued to collapse, nearly making us lose our balance. Crack! Evelyn's hair swayed as bolts of lightning flickered across her eyes, and without wasting a moment, several magic circles formed around her, shooting down at the monsters appearing from every direction. Bang! The impact was devastating, sending several of the monsters scattering away as I finally managed to get a good look at them. Sandworms. Their frames were enormous, easily 4 or 5 times our size, their thick bodies coiling through the sand as though they were moving in water. Swoosh! Segments of armored hide rippled as they moved, each motion sending fresh cascades of sand sliding down their sides. One of them surged upward, and its maw opened wide. Careful! Instead of a single mouth, it split into 4 separate sections that peeled back from the center, unfolding slowly and disturbingly, almost like a flower blooming in fast motion. Each petal-like section revealed rows of jagged teeth lining the inner edges, glistening as grains of sand poured from between them. They charged at us relentlessly, barely giving us any time to breathe. It wasn't that they were strong, but there were many of them, and they charged at us from every direction. Swoosh! As the sand beneath me collapsed and one of them shot toward me from below, I glanced around before a magic circle formed in my grasp. Several chains shot out from the circle, gathering around my hand before shifting into a shield made of chains. Clank! Sparks flew as the sandworm's teeth met with my makeshift shield. But I wasn't done. The moment the shield blocked its attack, several chains shot out from the shield, shooting down the sandworm's mouth and entering its body. The sandworm flailed the moment it happened, letting out a sharp hiss as the chains continued to drive down. Its struggle didn't last long, however, as its body began to shrink, almost as if all the water were being sucked out of it. Thump! By the time its body fell, it looked completely different from when it first appeared, its body now extremely tiny. I looked at the spell in my hand, feeling a little satisfied as the shield tore apart and several chains moved around my body. This wasn't the limit to the improved skill, Condemnation of Alacantria. There was still much more it could do. There's no better way than to test this here, and that was exactly what I did. As more sandworms began to appear from beneath the ground, I fought back with my new skills, reshaping the chains in all sorts of different ways and getting adjusted to the new skills. Thump! Thump! One after another, the sandworms began to get taken down by me and the others. Taking them down one after another, I soon lost track of how many of them I managed to take down, but it had to be in the several dozen. The others were also faring just as well, getting rid of the sandworms without much difficulty. Even Inaz was faring quite well. But I soon began to realize something. Swoosh! It's not stopping. Pulling back, I looked beneath me as the sand split apart and several more worms appeared. They charged at us relentlessly, spraying sand in all directions, as I had no choice but to step up my game and start using my other skills. Thump! I started to kill at an even faster rate. Thump! Thump! But even that wasn't enough. The more I killed, the more there seemed to be. It was almost as if it were an endless cycle. How many are there? It's not stopping. The others also appeared to have taken note of the situation. The monsters weren't strong, but they felt endless. Fuck! What in the world is this? Sliding down the steep face of a dune, I raised an arm to shield my face as the wind drove sand against my skin in sharp, stinging bursts. Grains scratched and prickled across my cheeks and forehead, forcing my eyes half shut as I struggled to keep my balance on the shifting slope. Uck! Through the haze, I barely managed to turn my head toward where the others had been. The air was dense with that strange, dark yellow tint, the blowing sand turning the sky into a blurred canvas where the 2 distant suns felt like pale white lamps that provided some semblance of light. But it was in the midst of that hazy observation that I noticed it. An enormous shadow. Its body faded in and out of my vision as curtains of sand swept past, revealing it for only a moment at a time before swallowing it again. Each brief glimpse showed something tremendously large shifting beneath the haze, its outline swelling within my vision as the hiss in the air grew stronger. My chest tightened. Then, it moved, an enormous fist shooting in the direction of the others, the pressure terrifying enough to make my chest feel heavy. Shit! Destroyer rank. Chapter 857. Land of Fire. 4. The pressure was intense. Strong enough to make everyone stop as a large silhouette slowly emerged through the storm, its massive frame towering over us in every sense, barely visible through the swirling sand and wind. Swoosh! Its first shot down in the direction of the others. Careful! I wanted to reach them, but the distance was a little too far for me to cover. To make matters worse, because it was a monster, my emotive magic wasn't as effective. But thankfully, a figure blurred right before the incoming attack. Holding tightly onto his sword, Leon's entire body radiated a powerful pressure as his eyes turned an even deeper shade of black. He slashed forward with all his might. Shying. His sword came into contact with the fist head-on. But, ach! The fist completely avoided Leon's sword, phasing right through it before striking him cleanly and sending him crashing back against the sand. Thump! Leon! Shit, Leon! The impact sounded devastating, and when I looked in Leon's direction, I saw him on the ground, blood dripping from his face as he struggled to get up. The monster didn't give him time to breathe. Following the strong gale of the wind, the monster arrived before Leon in no time, its enormous frame shifting once more as it launched another attack. Its movements were so fast that hardly anyone could keep up with him. To make matters even worse, the sandworms still attacked us from every direction. I watched as Leon forced himself up to avoid the incoming attack, sand spraying in every direction as he pushed off the ground. In the next instant, he rushed forward and followed up with another attack, but just like before, the creature effortlessly phased through Leon's strike and slammed into his body, sending him spiraling back across the sand. Bang! How is this possible? It all happened incredibly fast, but I was still able to see everything as Leon looked similarly shocked. No shit! I have to help him. With no time to spare, I drew several swords and shot them toward the enormous creature, using my version of telekinesis granted by Almighty's evolved skill. Swoosh! But, swoosh! Swoosh! The swords did absolutely nothing, passing through the Colossus as it continued to charge in Leon's direction. To make matters worse, the sand beneath me split as several sandworms shot up at once. Dealing with one of the sandworms, I looked towards my shoulder where an owl appeared. I nudged in Almighty's direction. Can you? That's a sand titan. The owl cut me off before I could speak. It's not something that I can deal with. It won't fall for my illusions. Then, not even that cat will be able to do it. No physical attack will get to the sand titan. You might be able to deal with it if you combine forces with that woman named but it'll take everything you have in order to do so. Bang! Leon! Sand scattered in all directions as the titan attacked once more, Leon's body crashing onto the sand as blood seeped from every part of his body. Looking at him, he looked completely helpless as he struggled to get back up. His dark pupils trembled further as he stared at the titan, and despite his injured body, it was clear that he had broken several bones. Mana started to accumulate around his sword. Power surged through him. He seemed to be getting ready for a powerful attack. I looked around. My eyes settled over to Anne. She had managed to push past the numerous sandworms, shooting towards Leon just as the titan's frame expanded, and it drove its fist down once more. Leon screamed, slashing at the sand titan with all his might. The attack was powerful, enough to make me feel alarmed. But the same situation occurred, the attack cleaving through the storm, but phasing right through the titan as Leon's eyes widened before he was engulfed by the massive fist, his body crashing down. Bang! Leon! Leon's body bounced off the sand, his face pale as he spat a mouthful of blood. At the same time, a figure moved close to him. Sand scattered in all directions once more, the harsh glare of the sandstorm making everything incredibly hard to see. Grains whipped through the air, stinging my skin and blurring the shapes around us until even nearby figures became little more than shifting shadows. Nevertheless, through mana sense, I was able to see that and had succeeded in rescuing Leon. Her gaze shot in my direction. We should leave. I clenched my teeth, looking at the enormous figure standing before us as a book materialized in my hands, and Anne's speed increased. She wasn't the only one. I boosted everyone else's speed as I used my integrated domain. Leave. It was as Almighty had said. There was no point in staying longer to fight the Titan. I didn't know much information about it, and even if I did fight it, I'd have to risk my life in order to beat it. I just didn't think it was worth it. Swoosh. Swoosh. Thanks to the added speed, we were able to put more distance between ourselves and the Sand Titan as its enormous frame gradually disappeared into the sandstorm. Its outline became harder and harder to make out, until it was little more than a shifting shadow within the swirling sand. But the worms continued to chase after us. The ground trembled beneath our feet as they moved below the surface, the sand bulging and collapsing in rapid bursts before the creatures shot upward from all directions, forcing us to keep running. My mana drained rapidly as a result of my actions, but it didn't matter as I caught up with and checked Leon's condition. "How is he doing?" "I don't know," and replied as she held Leon's body over her shoulder. "He seems to have broken several bones. He also left his sword back there. I wasn't able to get it for him, but if things had gone on, then it would have been really bad for him. That Sand Titan was a really bad matchup for him. Only a powerful elemental mage would have been able to deal with it." Crack. Suddenly, bolts of lightning shot in all directions, hitting the sandworms precisely and sending them scattering back, and looked in the direction of the lightning, mumbling, "Like that." I also looked at Evelyn, but shook my head. "There's no point. She'll have to go all out in order to do something meaningful to the Sand Titan, and by them she'll waste all of her energy. I have a feeling that the Sand Titan is going to be the least of our problems over here." Still, I looked around, making sure that everyone was present. I activated Eye of Existence. It almost felt as though someone had smashed my head with a heavy hammer, my skull threatening to split as I activated the skill for all of us. I just barely managed to keep myself from groaning as I nearly stumbled forward, the mana inside of my body dropping at an alarming rate. But I was prepared for this, aware of just how much Eye of Existence consumed, and the fact that I had to use it on all of us. I knew of the risks that came with it. But it was worth it. Looking around and seeing the sandworms stop, I looked at Aoife, who didn't waste a single second and tossed each of us a sword. Hopping onto the sword, Aoife dragged us forward with her telekinesis, sending us shooting through the air at neck-breaking speed. We zoomed past everything as I kept Eye of Existence active for as long as I possibly could have while she carried us forward. Just as it was hard for me to use Eye of Existence, it was also hard for her to control so many swords at once while carrying us through the desert as her face paled every second. But we had no choice but to keep moving forward. I raised a hand to cover my face, feeling the sharp prickle of the sandstorm around us as grains lashed against my skin at our elevated speed. I didn't know how long we carried on like this. It must have been for at least a dozen minutes as our speed gradually started to die down. By now, I had long since cancelled Eye of Existence, my breath heavy as my mana was completely depleted. There was nothing left in the tank. Though the sandstorm still raged around us, we eventually dropped back onto the sand, slumping down as we took deep, heavy breaths. Ha! Ha! My lungs were on fire, and every part of me was exhausted. It had been a while since I had felt like this while fighting something. I thought I had gotten a lot stronger, but it's clear that the mirror dimension is no simple place. I'm starting to wonder how the people living here have managed to survive. This place was treacherous. Looking at and Anaz, I started to have a newfound appreciation for the two of them. But before that, how is he doing? I forced myself up as I looked at Leon. Blood was still leaking out from his forehead, and staring at his twisted arm, it was obvious that it was broken. However, outside of those external injuries, he didn't seem to be in any critical condition. "He should wake up in a bit," and replied after carefully looking at him. I'm honestly quite surprised he didn't sustain any more serious injuries than this. Considering monsters are usually stronger than humans of the same tier, that creature was clearly a high-ranked destroyer rank. To only sustain this much, your friend over here is quite sturdy. I know. I sighed in relief after seeing that Leon was fine. However, I didn't smile. Sitting back down in the sand to catch my breath, I looked around. The sandstorm still raged on, making it hard for me to see ahead. But above all, I wasn't able to detect a single thing, be it mana sense or emotive magic. I wasn't able to see the monsters coming before it was too late. Was it because they were underneath the sand? Was that why I wasn't able to sense them? Or was there more to it? I need to quickly think of a way to get into the main city. As strong as we are, it's clear that this place is still too dangerous. We need to. I could barely finish my thought before I suddenly grew alarmed, feeling the sand around us begin to shift. The ground trembled slightly as the sand lifted and slid away, cascading down in thin streams. Then figures began to emerge from beneath the surface. One after another, they rose out of the sand in all directions, until we found ourselves completely surrounded. My heart sank. What sort of dog shit luck was this? Chapter 858. Kara Tog 1. The sand scattered to reveal humanoid-looking figures. I immediately tensed, looking at the others. They were all similarly tensed, Aoife and Kira moving to shield Leon's recovering body while and moved in front of Anaz. Given my current situation, there's no way I can put up a proper fight if they're monsters. Are we gonna have to run away again? That was my initial thought. But soon, I realized something. They're humans. I could see them clearly now. The orbs floating inside their bodies. There's no doubt about it, they're human. I muttered once again, my eyes narrowing as I focused my attention on the orbs in their bodies. With this, I felt a sense of relief. I was out of mana, but emotive magic was different. It used minimal mana. In that sense, I could fight. What? What did you say? They're humans? How? Everyone looked at me, but I didn't look back at them. Instead, I fixed my eyes on the humans in front of me. While it was true that they were human, their current attire made it hard to tell. Their entire bodies were covered from top to bottom in strange tatters resembling those of mummies, their sizes varying from one to another. But if there was one thing they all had in common, it was the chains dangling from their arms and ankles. They looked quite familiar to the ones we found back in the forest. Surrounding us from all sides, they stared at us cautiously, each holding a different weapon. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, they quietly observed us as they released quiet ticks from their mouth. Tick, tick. Were they communicating? I stood up, pretending to be fine while looking at them. This is so weird. They were all strong but not strong enough to pose a threat. But that wasn't what was weird. What was weird to me was how they were able to appear in front of us without me noticing at all. Was it really because they came from the sand? As the tension in the air rose, and suddenly stepped forward. Give me a moment. She looked around, her gaze eventually settling on one of the robed figures. Unlike the rest, his clothes were different, darker in shade. The moment Anne's lips parted, a strange language flowed from her mouth. Aruk, Ta Liek. The figures around us paused, their heads slowly turning to look at one another. But eventually, the dark-clothed figure spoke. Sulla Tatim Sain Turk. It replied in a similar tongue to what Anne had used. But it was clear that while Anne knew the language, she wasn't very proficient in it, as she took her time forming each sentence before speaking to them. Honestly, this was fine. I was fine for as long as she knew how to talk to them. Although we have some devices to translate, it doesn't seem familiar with this language. When we get into the city, I'll try to see if they have some sort of spell or device to translate for us. Carlson Rimini O Era. The conversation between Anne and the boss lasted for several minutes before she turned her attention back towards us. I am not very proficient with the language, but I still understand enough to communicate with them. In essence, the people before us should be the Namen. Namen? They're those who have failed to qualify for a rank and are trying to make a living through the scraps that can be found from the monsters. Many of them are slaves, having sold their lives to provide for their families. What? Anne extended her hand. I promised them some food in exchange for the information and guidance towards Karatok. Noticing my confusion, she added, That's the city's name. No, I got it. I took out several bags of food that I had stored inside my ring and handed them to her. I just didn't expect the situation to be resolved with some food. You'll be surprised to see just how valuable food is here, and smirked while taking the bags and handing them to the Namen. Immediately, the group took the bags and opened them up, their body language noticeably more jolly as they grabbed several of the items inside and shoved them into their mouth. The moment they began to eat, I caught a glimpse of their faces as they pulled their masks down. It was then that I saw their mutilated features, scars running in every direction. Their dark skin also marked with bruises and burns. Don't be surprised, and spoke, taking note of my expression. This place is quite different from most places that you've been. In this place, the only rule that matters is status and strength. If you don't have strength, you're nothing to this place. And you're telling me they're weak? I looked at the group ahead of us. While they weren't anything noteworthy compared to us, they were still relatively strong, at around the 4th to 5th tier. This was considered good in any place that I had been to. And yet, she was telling me that this wasn't even enough for them to qualify for a good status? The law only protects those who manage to rank. Anyone who doesn't get a rank is not protected by the laws of this place. And quietly replied while looking at the group as they devoured the food provided to them. There are a few other ways for some to gain status, but the most famous way is through obtaining a rank through a ranking battle. Looking back at the Namen, there was more that I wanted to ask, but Anne merely shrugged her shoulders. This is as far as I've managed to learn. Don't ask me more since it's really tough. For now, it's best if we enter the city and get some rest. Her head turned in Leon's direction. Most importantly, he needs to heal up. You're right. I also looked at Leon. His complexion was still pale, but he was still passed out. Unlucky. He would have normally have lasted a lot longer, but he had gone up against a high-ranked destroyer ranked. One that couldn't be dealt with by physical attacks either. It was just the worst matchup for Leon. Kami Soren Thel Miran Yuza Tel Malian Teak. Suddenly calling out for Anne, the Nomian leader gestured a few things to her, and looked confused at first, but immediately understood a moment later as she looked back at us. He's saying that they're ready to leave. He also said that we need to be careful about the way that we move. The sandworms detect us through sound and vibration. If we stay completely still, the sandworms won't attack us, and at the same time, if we want to avoid attracting their attention, we should not step on the sand. Ah! For some reason, the explanation felt so self-explanatory that I felt like smacking my own head. Why didn't I think of that? It made sense if I thought about it. That was also not a hard problem to resolve. I looked at Aoife. You talk half, I take the other half? Yes, but I'll need more time. Same here. The idea was simple. We used telekinesis and flew over the sand. Although it was going to take a large toll on us, if we recovered enough and we went at acceptable speeds, we should be able to do it until we reached the city. And even if we don't, we can just take a rest. Either way, I have plenty of food that I can share with them so that they can guide us. The plan was clear. With everything said and done, I relayed the information to Anne, who relayed it back to the Namen, who paused before looking at each other and shaking their heads. Anne's brows furrowed. Kalik. Sam Hel Dain. Talon Moraes Yumian Talian Sarin Sun Shan Nal Tayak. Ah! And put on a troubled expression. Eventually, she nodded and looked back at us. They have to leave. There's no choice for them. They also have a strict quota that they have to meet. If they don't meet it, their families will be sold as collateral, or they won't be allowed back into the city. Quota? What for? For monster material and bodies. They're used for both clothes and food. Monster material? I had a sudden thought, shifting my attention back in the direction of where we came from. Anne's eyes lit up as she had the same idea as me. Turning her attention back towards the Namen, she quickly started to talk with them. They all exchanged glances. After a brief moment, one of the Namen's bodies sank into the sand, fading from our line of sight. What sort of ridiculous skill is that? I felt the sudden urge to learn the skill. The urge only grew stronger after he came back a few minutes later, communicating with his leader, who looked back at Anne and gave her a nod. She didn't need to translate this part. That's a relief. The other Namens sank into the sand, all fading from our line of sight as Anne sat down on the sand, closing her eyes to catch up on her stamina. She also looked mentally exhausted from all the translation. Mustn't have been easy. I stopped bothering her and similarly closed my eyes, trying my best to recuperate my mana. For the next step, I needed to do so. About an hour passed like this. Although I didn't manage to recover all of my mana, I did manage to recover a significant amount. When I opened up my eyes again, I was surprised to see several large corpses lying in front of me. When I looked around, I saw the Namen quick at work as they efficiently cut down the sandworms into pieces. From the way they handle the knife, it almost looks like they're some professional chefs. I stood up, walking towards the corpses to get a better look. The sandworm's body was very large. Although it wasn't as big as the Sand Titan, it was still very large. Probably as big as a large ship, with its outer shell being extremely hard. Moving towards one of the corpses, I tapped on the outer shell to feel just how hard it was. Tack! The sound bounced off like I was hitting heavy metal. It's no wonder they want to use for material. With skin so tough, a skilled laborer can probably turn it into fine armor. Tapping the outer shell again, I was reminded of something as my movements paused. Because the amount it helped was almost negligible, I often forgot about it and never paid much attention to it. However, after everything that I had gone through, something clicked inside my mind as I opened my status window. In the corner, I took note of several notifications. EXP plus 0.001%. The numbers were almost negligible, to the point where they felt irrelevant. But that wasn't what I was focused on. I was focused on the idea. Right, killing monsters does make me stronger. It makes me gain experience. But why? Why was I gaining experience? Looking back at the monster's body, my breathing grew heavier as I placed my hand over its hard shell and closed my eyes. I didn't know how long I kept at it. It felt like an instant to me, but maybe it took longer as a certain voice shook my head out of my thoughts. Julian? It was Evelyn as she looked at me. It's Leon. He's awake. I see. I pulled my hand away from the monster, looking at it. I'd normally be excited about Leon's recovery, but at this moment, I could hardly think about it. Bah, thump, bah, thump. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat as it pounded loudly inside my head. I think I got it. I swallowed my saliva. I think I found the secret behind the experience. Chapter 859. Kara Tog 2. How are you feeling, Leon? Like I've been hit by a gigantic monster. Ah! Julian moved closer to Leon, his lips pressing together as he bent over to hold Leon's hand. Let me hold your hand when I tell you this. But that's exact. Fuck off. Leon slapped Julian's hand away. You think I don't know what happened? Honestly, probably not. It all happened so fast. Leon's jaw tightened, but he eventually sighed, letting it go. There's no point in arguing with him. Every part of his body ached. From his skull down to his arms and legs. He could feel several of his bones had broken, but he wasn't particularly concerned about his injuries. In fact, now that he was conscious, they were starting to heal rapidly. Well, I'm glad that you're awake. I'll fill you in on the situation later, but for now, rest up. We'll be leaving in 10 minutes. All right. Oh, and about your sword. And couldn't get it because of the situation. Was the word important? If you want, we can. No, it's all right. It wasn't my main sword. Is that so? Then that's good. Julian nodded, turning around to look at the sandworms. Don't beat yourself up too much because of what happened. It was just a bad matchup for you. I would have struggled the same. If anything, you did well in grabbing its attention. Things would have been quite bad had you not done so. Thanks. Well, I'll go. As I said, we'll leave soon, so try your best to recover. Will do. Leon smiled as Julian turned around and left. In all honesty, Leon had already been filled in on the situation by Evelyn and the others. Julian joined up a little bit later. Thus, he knew about the weird people roaming around them, chopping down on the numerous sandworms. Leon felt a sudden pat on his right shoulder as Kira looked at him from above. They're almost done on their side too, but there's no need to rush. If you feel any discomfort, just let us know. Either way, Aoife is the one who will carry us. Hey! What? Am I saying something wrong? No, but... Then what? Never mind. Aoife didn't bother arguing with Kira as she continued patting Leon on the shoulder. She did so a couple of more times before eventually leaving. The only one that remained was Evelyn as she stood in silence, carefully staring at him. But eventually, all she mumbled was a soft, "Get well." Before leaving, Leon smiled back at her, watching as her back moved towards the others. He stared at them in silence, maintaining his smile. Yes, he smiled, because that was all he could do. Even as his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, Leon continued to smile. For it really was the only thing he could do. We'll be on our own once we arrive at the main entrance of the city. Entering the city is not that difficult, but the issue is that we'll have no status once we enter. Unless we can provide some use to the city, we'll be kicked out within the first 24 hours of our entrance. Anne's voice echoed in the background as I quietly stared at my hand. I tried my best to pay attention to her words, but there was something else that was taking over my mind. Something a lot more important. Status can only be acquired in a few different ways. One, if you're a merchant. If you can provide some goods that can catch the interest of the people, you'll be able to earn a few more days in the city. But even that is limited to a few days. You can also become a gate warden, meaning that you'll stand by the gates to protect the city. But the mortality rate of such a job is extremely high. Runes. The monsters' bloods contain runes. I had never noticed it in the past, but now that I had gotten a good grasp of them, I was almost certain that the blood of the monsters contained runes. In fact, it may even be an outer rune. But I wasn't certain of this aspect. The main issue was that the runes were incomplete. There were only bits and pieces of them hidden within the blood, and although I could absorb them, the rate of absorption was extremely low. In order for me to speed up that process, I needed to find the complete rune. But that was easier said than done. There are a few other roles and jobs one can take in order to stay in the city longer. If you sell yourself to a ranker and become a Namen, then you'll be able to stay for as long as the ranker remains in the ranks. Or, you can become a ranker yourself. The rune in the blood was incomplete, like a tiny fragment of a bigger rune that I had to assemble, like a small piece of a massive puzzle. If I wanted to complete the rune, I'd have to keep killing to collect more fragments in order to fill the rune. Wait, a thought occurred to me then. Since I've been killing monsters for a while and my experience has increased, maybe the system has collected a few of the runes for me? The thought made my eyes light up, but just as I tried to see whether the system had acquired anything, a hand pressed against my shoulder and shook me. Hey! Anne's face appeared a few inches away from mine. Are you all right? Did you listen to anything that I said? You're the one who asked me to find this information, so if you're not paying attention to it, then, no, I was listening. More or less. Oh? Then what do you think we should do? We might as well use our daily pass first before figuring that out. I don't plan on staying in Karatog for very long. Worst comes, then we can just start trading some stuff. I've got an accumulation of items. And if that's not enough? I paused, chewing on my thoughts. Well, I shrugged. I guess we get a rank. What else were we supposed to do? Since that was the only option left, I wouldn't mind doing it. I preferred not to do it because of all the attention that we'd be receiving. After all, this was not friendly territory. In fact, I wasn't even sure if Cithrus was here. If he was, no, it's unlikely. There's a reason why I decided to come here now instead of later. There was no better time to rescue Noelle than now. Wait! Suddenly, Anne's steps came to a stop. They turned their attention back to us, pointing towards the distance while muttering things I couldn't understand. Anne frowned, seemingly struggling to understand before turning to look back at us. We're almost here. They'll be leaving ahead of us. Swoosh! Swoosh! Not even a moment after her words fell, the Namen all sank into the ground, fading from our line of sight as they most likely shot towards the direction where they pointed. However, even as I looked, I couldn't find the city. Where exactly is this place? I can't see anything, Kira mumbled, her eyes narrowing as she tried to look into the distance. After the distance we had walked, the sandstorm had cooled down quite a bit, making it easier to see, but despite that we still couldn't find a single thing. Even as we decided to walk ahead, the city remained completely hidden from our line of sight. Strange, Anne mumbled, squinting her eyes as well as she looked ahead. According to them, the city should have been ahead. Did I get lied to? No, you didn't, I replied to her while looking ahead. The others couldn't see it, but I could. The numerous orbs that floated in my vision right ahead of me. What? I can't see anything? What are you saying? Just follow me. I didn't answer them and just walked ahead. It wasn't like I didn't want to answer them, but I wouldn't be able to explain to them even if I wanted to. Instead, it was much better for me to show them. And sure enough, swoosh, taking another step forward, something began to appear in the distance as the strong wind continued to blow our way, the sand prickling against our skin with even greater ferocity. Tall walls made of sandstone slowly came into view, their height stretching several meters high and rising in layered tiers that climbed one above the other. Time and sand had worn their surfaces, yet the structure still stood firm against the raging storm. At the very front stood a massive gate, its imposing frame towering over the entrance as if guarding whatever lay beyond the walls. That's... How come I didn't see it? Do you think it was some sort of illusion? Maybe. I think that's what it is. A mirage. The moment the walls came into view, I felt the back of my neck prickle as multiple gazes fell in our direction. Thankfully, our faces were covered as we walked towards the gate. As my steps sank into the ground and walked ahead, with her being the translator, it was best if she took the lead. Eventually, she arrived before the gate and looked around. Just as her lips parted, something manifested from the ground beneath. Swoosh! Swoosh! Several burly men appeared, sand crawling down their bodies as they were dressed in attire similar to the Namen, though theirs was a darker shade of brown. From the moment they appeared, I could instantly tell that they were a lot stronger than the people we had previously met. However, they were still not enough to make me feel threatened. But then again, for just the front guards to be this strong, just how strong are the people inside? My heart skipped a beat for a moment as Anne communicated with them. The conversation went on for several minutes until she eventually turned towards me, her hand reaching out as I understood what she wanted and handed her some food. The guards looked at one another before taking the food. At the same time, they handed each one of us a strange scale. It was pitch black in color and looked incredibly durable. Keep the scale with you. For as long as it's black, we'll be able to stay in the city. From the moment the scale turns white, we'll be haunted by everyone within the city. I drew a cold breath. What sort of savages? Let's go. And stepped forward, reaching for the massive gate and pushing it open with both hands. The enormous frame slowly pulled apart, the hiss of the wind beginning to fade as it was replaced by a low, steady humming sound. Soon, the inside of the city was revealed to us. Welcome, and said, pushing past the doors. Welcome to Karatog, the only city within the Land of Fire. Chapter 860. Karatog 3. What is? Stepping past the massive gates, I didn't expect anything particularly mind-blowing, perhaps just a city protected by towering walls, with people living in fairly normal conditions like the other cities I had been to. No, maybe that was a little too much. I understood from the start that life in the mirror dimension wasn't easy. I knew that the people were struggling, and I was prepared to see some of that struggle. But what I was greeted with was something that I had never expected in a million years. What is this place? Are we really in the right place? It was dark. The streets were wide and dim, but trash littered the surroundings in uneven piles. Corpses lay by the roadside, their bodies slowly decomposing under the relentless heat, a faint stench lingering in the air as the heat beat down on the silent streets. Ugh! The smell was strong, enough to make any of us feel like puking. I just barely held myself back while I looked up. There was not a shred of sunlight. No, I can see something. A small hole up ahead where I can see some light, but it's very small from where I'm at. It almost felt as though I was at the bottom of a well. Yes, that's how I'd describe it. I did expect this, but the situation is a lot worse than I previously imagined. and spat while looking around and trying her best to keep her expression in check. We all turned in her direction, wondering what she was saying, and just continued. I thought you guys would have already understood from the moment I told you that we only have a day to stay here, but not just anyone can stay in this city. The Land of Fire is particularly lacking in resources and food. That's why it can't host many people, and there's only one city. Walking ahead while covering her face further with the robe she had, I followed from behind, using lamentive lies on us just for precaution. The air was dry, and the warmth felt intense. This is a city that values people based on their worth. It doesn't matter where you come from, who your father is, or what your lineage is. What matters is that you're strong and can provide for the city. The stronger you are, the more privileges you have. Pausing and looked up, towards the small hole in the sky. You get to live on the higher levels. Higher floors? And pointed toward the distance, where an enormous dark pillar rose into view. It stood at the very center of the city, towering above the surrounding structures as it stretched upward all the way to the top, its massive form visible from nearly every direction. Connected to it were several large platforms that stretched out toward the edges of the walls, forming what appeared to be the next floors. There were still gaps between the levels, and from time to time, I noticed things falling from above, presumably trash from the higher levels. You can only go up through the pillar. However, only those who have status are granted access to the higher levels. Taking out her scale, she looked back at us. We've only been given access to the lowest level, and by the time our time is up, we'll be forced to leave. And turned her attention to me. How do you plan on proceeding? I remained silent, unsure of how to answer her. My goal was simple: to find any information regarding Noel and where he was locked up. In fact, as of right now, I wasn't even sure if the information was correct. I had been going blindly through Panthea's words, but there was no guarantee that Crazy Bitch told me the truth. This could have very well been a trap. But nevertheless, it was the only lead that I had. Taking a deep breath, I massaged my face. I looked at our group before eventually deciding to settle down. Everyone looked exhausted. In particular, Leon, whose face was still pale, was recovering from his injuries. I'll think about something after we get some rest. All right, and nodded her head in agreement as she started asking around for directions. In the meantime, I took a moment to carefully observe the surroundings. The architecture was strange, the houses built from brittle sandstone that looked worn, many of them broken in certain areas. A few stalls stood along the streets, but they carried little, their empty displays giving the place a bleak, neglected feel. Small steps led toward different areas, the narrow passages and uneven pathways making everything feel incredibly cramped. One thing I particularly noted, aside from the state of the place, was the people. While many of them were malnourished, some even having chains on their arms and legs, they were all rather strong. They're not much weaker than an Ez. Subconsciously, my head drifted in his direction. I know what you're thinking. I looked away. Okay, I found a place where we can stay, and came back a few moments after. It's not far from here, and we should be able to stay for the night. But, there's the but, they don't accept food as payment, and quickly explained the situation to us. It wasn't complicated. In short, the only way for us to pay was through the city's currency, which was the khan. Thankfully, I've managed to get some by exchanging it with someone, and showed a small bag. However, it isn't enough for other things. The most I can do is get some rooms. That's more than enough, I replied while looking back at the others. They had been strangely silent from the moment they stepped into the city, their expressions stiff as they took in the scenes around them. The reality of the mirror dimension had probably sunk into their minds for the first time since they had been here. Yeah, this place isn't a pretty sight. There were a lot of corpses and people who seemed to be struggling to even walk straight. But if there was one most noticeable thing, it was the lack of children and old people. Most likely, they've been thrown out of the city, and had already explained it to us, but the weak didn't get to stay in this place. This included children and old people. There was a limit to the number of people who could stay, and every slot was desperately fought for by the people. But of course, if the parents can somehow secure a job or get a rank, they'll be allowed to stay. Taking a look around me, I took a deep breath, trying my best not to think about it. This place was truly sickening. It was thump, 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 thump. My thoughts were abruptly disrupted as a loud drumming sound echoed throughout the entire city. Thump, thump. The drumming was loud. Loud enough to make the ground rattle as the people around us stirred to life. What's going on? What is happening? Is the city getting attacked? No. Anne's eyes narrowed as she looked up. She wasn't the only one. All the citizens looked up at once, towards the empty space in the air. And just as I grew confused, Several large holograms manifested around the city as my eyes widened slightly. What the hell is that? Ranking battle, Anne announced, taking a deep breath as she looked up. At the same time, the holograms shifted as two figures appeared within a large arena. The walls were lined with deep scars, while the ground was encircled by towering stands. Spectators filled every side, their cheers silent yet somehow still felt as the people around us erupted in excitement, their expressions bordering on fanaticism. Sem Gorian. Gorian Sem Ishma. Gorian. 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 Ishma. 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 Asima. I stared at the hologram in silence as the fight began, the two figures in the hologram lunging at each other. The fight was intense. Both sides attacked each other relentlessly, employing all sorts of tricks and tactics in their attempts to kill one another. Their movements were fast and precise, each strike carrying clear intent. Although I couldn't accurately gauge their strength from where I stood, it was obvious they were far from ordinary fighters. The sheer brutality of the fight made me wince as blood spilled across the sand. Faces caved in under crushing blows, while pieces of flesh tore away and fell to the ground, exposing bone beneath. But above all, ha 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 ha. Ishma. Salium Cage Isham. Rum. Rum. The sheer fanaticism of the people around me threw me completely off. Looking around, it almost felt as though I wasn't watching humans, but a pack of bloodthirsty hyenas circling wounded prey. It's over. The fight didn't last very long. Both sides were quite evenly matched, but the balance broke when one of the fighters suddenly bit into their opponent's face, tearing away a chunk of flesh. Seizing the opening, they drove their thumbs into the opponent's eyes, blinding them completely. The rest was a bunch of gore as the warrior named Gorian didn't stop, attacking over and over again, turning his opponent into a pulp. Gorian, 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 Gorian. Cheers erupted all over the place as the people celebrated fanatically, while Gorian stood on top of the remains of the other warrior, raising his large hands above him as the people in the stands cheered, just like the crowd beneath. I took in the scene around me and pursed my lips. There's nothing else to see. I already knew this place was brutal, but it went beyond my expectations. Still, I wasn't here to witness the fights. I was here to figure out Noelle's location. There was no need for me to stay any longer. Let's go. There's nothing else to us. My words came to an abrupt stop a moment later as something dropped in Gorian's direction. Catching the item, Gorian raised it into the air as the crowd cheered alongside him. I looked at the object in his hand. It looked like a small vial filled with a red liquid. My heart skipped a beat as Gorian brought the vial to his mouth. Then, under the cheers of everyone present, his body started to heal rapidly. From the deep wounds to the ones that seemed to be impossible to heal, every single one of his wounds healed as he tossed the glass vial to the ground before roaring. Wah! Gorian! 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 All the noise around me seemed to fade, replaced by a constant ringing in my ears. When I turned my head, Leon's gaze met mine. Julian, that's... I know. I answered, the words coming awfully calm. I know. Chapter 861. Kara Tog, 4. This might not be much, but it'll do for now. I used everything that we were able to trade, and spoke as she handed each of us a key. No, to be more precise, she handed a key to me, Evelyn, and herself. You and Leon will sleep together, and turned to look at Evelyn, Kira, and Aoife. You three sleep together. And... She turned her attention towards Inez. You sleep with me. Huh? Inez blinked a couple of times. Then, looking at me, he scratched the side of his chin. Is it appropriate? I mean, I can... Fuck off. Grabbing him by the collar, she dragged him away. The others and I could only watch the two with dumbfounded expressions as we all looked at each other. In the end, Kira broke the silence. Who do you think is top? No, seriously. It's a genuine question. Fuck. Whatever. You all are too depressing to be with. Clicking her tongue, she snatched the keys from Evelyn's hands as she eventually moved towards her room. Aoife and Evelyn eventually followed her from behind. I looked at the three before settling my gaze in Leon's direction. Should we go? He still looked like shit. His face was pale and he looked like he needed some rest. Tossing the keys in my hand, I looked around for our room. To be honest, this place was awful. The old wooden floor creaked beneath each step. As I glanced at the doors lining the corridor, I noticed several cracks running through them. If someone wanted to, they could easily peek inside the rooms without much trouble. But that wasn't the most troublesome thing. The smell. It was the smell of this place. That was what was truly making the place extremely bad. It was a mix of rotten and mold. Not to the point where I would feel like puking, but enough to make me repulsed. We're here. Stopping before our room, I pushed the door open and entered. I didn't expect much upon entering, but that was a lie. I did have some expectations, maybe just a small hope that the room would at least be livable. But as I stared at the two beds without mattresses and the furniture falling apart, it felt like sleeping outside in the sand would probably be the better option. This will do. It seemed like I was the only one who had issues with the room as Leon moved towards his bed and sat down. At the same time, he closed his eyes as he circulated the mana inside his body. Most likely, he was trying to recuperate from his injuries. I thought about leaving him alone, but not even a few moments after, his voice reached my ears. That was Mortem's blood, wasn't it? My steps paused as I looked at the floor. Eventually, I nodded. Yes, I see. Leon nodded quietly. He was well aware of my situation and thus realized what the liquid inside the vial was. If the blood is here, then it's likely that he's here too, correct? Yes. This sort of confirmed Panthea's words. I had my doubts, but I was now more certain of it. Then, Leon opened his eyes, his gaze directed straight at me. Let me participate in the rankings. No. The answer came out immediately. But why? Can't you see the state of the room that we're in? If we don't do something quickly, then we'll not be able to stay here any longer. We have at most a day to stay here, and I doubt we'll be able to look for what you want in just a day. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is that we can't expose ourselves. Leon suddenly grew quiet. I continued to explain. We're not in the empires. We're in the mirror dimension. This isn't a place where we can just act as we wish. We're in fucking enemy territory. If you do choose to participate, you'll just get every single eye directed at you. There will be a very good risk that you'll expose yourself and us. This was the reason why I didn't want to participate or wanted others to participate. Dawn had eyes and ears everywhere. We were already walking on eggshells, and the moment one of us participated in the ranking battle, we'd just be serving ourselves on a platter. But there are no buts. I cut Leon off before he could get any words out. Staring at him, I could see the deep frown on his face, alongside his troubled expression. What? Was he still troubled about what had happened against that sand titan? It wasn't even his fault. Still, I didn't tell him this. I knew that whatever I told him at the moment regarding the sand titan would just go in deaf ears. Instead, you were taught by Noel, right? Leon raised his head slightly as I approached him. I corrected myself. Mortem. He taught you, right? To some extent. Even now, Leon had no idea about Noel's true identity as Aldrich. I still didn't have it in me to tell him. Nevertheless, in the years that he had been in the Ivinus household, Noel had taught him some things. Even through the chalice. In that case, although I don't know if you'll be able to feel it, I'll show you something. Extending my hand, a magic circle formed on top of my palm. Julian, stunned by my actions, Leon looked at me. I just nudged at the magic circle. Observe the magic circle carefully. Look at the insides of it. To be precise, look at the runes. See if you can notice anything. What are you? Despite his confusion, Leon still followed my instructions and observed the magic circle. At first, he seemed confused, but eventually, he seemed to have noticed something strange. I smiled then. As expected of an honor student. I call the outer runes. I explained the situation to Leon. They're runes that can completely change the properties of spells and the human body. I believe that the reason why the gods were able to become gods was specifically because of their ability to use the outer runes. Leon's lips parted, his eyes wide at the sudden information thrown at him. But just as they opened, his lips closed. I continued. Having been taught by Noel, and taking into consideration how you were able to heal from your injuries so fast, there's a good chance that there's some of those runes hidden within your blood. This was just a guess from my side. I wasn't certain, but I had a feeling that I was close to the truth. No, I mean, Mortem has most likely passed on something to you. If you can somehow tap into that power, you'll be able to grow exponentially. But that depends on you. Honestly, I myself am quite new to all of this and don't have a good grasp of everything. But I do know that you're capable of sensing the source. In that case, you might as well try it. Leon didn't answer me. It seemed like he was still processing my words. But eventually, as he looked at me, he asked, if you're saying that tapping onto these outer runes is what made the gods gods, doesn't that mean that you already tapping onto them make you a god? Suddenly, my mind went blank. There were a lot of things that I had thought Leon would say to me. From things like, how can I grasp this outer rune? What do I need to do to learn more? And so on. But this was the last question that I expected him to ask, as I suddenly burst out laughing. What? What is so funny? Nothing. I covered my mouth while looking at him. Eventually, I shrugged. I guess you can say that. He wasn't wrong with his assumption, but at the same time, I was still far from strong enough to be compared to the likes of them. Their understanding of the runes was much deeper than mine, and so was their power. Patting Leon on the shoulder, I turned my attention towards the bathroom. For now, just focus on the things that you can do. Try to feel for the rune inside your body if you have it and try to get a better grasp on it. Maybe then you'll be able to become a lot stronger. MHM. Leon nodded. I'll try, but... Never mind. Leon shook his head, seemingly changing his mind about something. My eyes narrowed when I looked at him, but I decided to let it go as I headed towards the bathroom, heading to the worn-down sink to wash my hands. Sha! As the water ran down the sink, I began to wash my hands, the cold water splashing across my fingers and running over my palms. The chill lingered against my skin as I rubbed my hands together beneath the thin stream. I felt at ease while washing my hands, almost entranced. Julian, only to snap out of it after hearing Leon's voice. How long are you going to wash your hands? It's been almost 10 minutes. I looked in Leon's direction. 10 minutes? What was he talking about? My thoughts came to an abrupt halt as my head flicked in the direction of the mirror, and my reflection stared back at me. Catching sight of myself, my breath came to a sudden pause. Everything looked and moved exactly as I did. But those eyes, they were completely pitch black, staring back at me as the hair at the back of my neck rose at once. That was all that happened. Nothing else happened in that moment, all fading after I blinked my eyes. But that was enough. That was enough for me to understand. They had taken notice of me. My chest trembled slightly, my hand pressing against my chest as I erased all emotions from within. This is not good. Chapter 862. Kara Tog, 5. They've found me. I stared at my face reflected in the shattered mirror before me, each splintered piece showing a distorted sliver of my expression. Before I knew it, the mirror had cracked, leaving me to stare at nothing but broken fragments of myself. The air was cold, and I felt a sense of heaviness press against my chest, as if I was still being watched. I knew that this was going to happen. It isn't something that I expected. Taking everything that had happened with Evelyn not too long ago, I knew that this was coming. From this moment forth, I had to stop thinking about them. The more I thought about them, the more I revealed to them. From this moment forward, I had to change into a completely different person. No, fuck that. I didn't want to become someone else. I was done pretending to be someone else. The last time was Lazarus, and the experience took quite a toll on me. Things had yet to progress to the point where I needed to turn into a completely different person. Yeah, I'll just not think about the situation for now. Focus all my attention on Noelle, and I should be able to escape their sight. My past self had also mentioned that I could hide my presence using the source. In that case, I planned on doing just that. Taking a deep breath, I pressed my hand over my shoulder. At the same time I did, I used outer hand. I felt an immediate reaction the moment I used the spell. In an instant, something cool washed over me as a thin white layer formed around my body. The cold air pressing in from every direction faded, and the heavy pressure lingering in the air slowly vanished. I felt my mind cool as I finally opened my eyes again. The mirror remained fractured, but I could see that I was faring a lot better than before. This should do for now. I felt a little exhausted, but this was a necessary step that I needed to take in order to avoid being targeted. Still, this is a temporary solution. There's no way I can fully escape their grasp even if I do this. The only way would be to minimize my presence as much as possible. I now understand why Atlas, Noelle, and every old monster pretended to be someone they weren't, even changing their own thoughts in a way that fit the world. Just how much dedication did that take? I'll need to start thinking about my next steps. Walking out of the bathroom, I saw Leon staring at me with a frown. What? Did something break in there? Yes, the mirror. Leon's brows furrowed further. He looked really troubled. What? No, it's nothing. He shook his head and pretended that it was nothing. But the more he acted like this, the more curious I became. What is it? Spit it out. I said it's nothing. No, say it. I told you no. It's a command. Hi. Leon sighed, eventually relenting. I was just thinking that it must have been a special mirror. What sort of? It probably saw through your soul. That's why it broke. He looked at me seriously. Black. It's really black. I opened my lips, but soon closed them. Eventually, I smiled. Looks like you've missed me a lot in the time that I wasn't here. Come to think of it, there are a few jokes that I have been thinking of sharing. What do you say? Black. Leon mumbled again, his face pale. Really black. This place looks like shit. Kira muttered while looking around her. She had been to shitty places in the past, but it had never been this bad. I'd much rather sleep outside than in this dump. Look. Even the door has a hole in it. Some pervert might just come and peek. Can just create a barrier, you know? It's not that big of a deal. Replying to her, Aoife took out the bedsheets and waved her hand, water emerging from her fingertips as she cleaned the bed. At the same time, she replaced the sheets with some of her own. Wah! Kira looked at this with wide eyes as she looked at Evelyn. Do you see this shit? But all she got in response was Evelyn's glance before she leaned back against her bed and closed her eyes. This girl. Kira frowned, taking note of Evelyn's change. Although Kira understood that what Evelyn had gone through was traumatic, her sudden and complete shift in personality still felt off to her. This is why you've always got to prepare yourself in advance. Satisfied with what she did, Aoife patted her hands. I've slept outside quite a lot recently due to the war. I've learned from experience. So that's what it is. Kira grumbled while leaning back on her bed. Honestly, she hadn't really cared much at first, but after seeing everything Aoife had done, Kira became more self-aware of just how dirty the sheets in bed were. As the image formed in her mind, she began to wiggle around the bed before eventually cursing and sitting up. Fuck! You've ruined it for me. Now she didn't feel like sleeping at all. Damn it! Standing up, she removed the bedsheets and looked at Aoife, nudging with her hand. Aoife sighed and obliged, cleaning the mattress for her. Kira watched all of this with a satisfied smile before sitting down on the bed and looking at the others. Nobody talked. Evelyn's eyes were still closed, and Aoife was busy preparing other things. Kira watched all of this in silence as she used to recall the past. This just doesn't feel right. It almost felt as though everyone had changed except her. They all acted so differently from how they used to act in the past, and it just felt weird, as though they were moving ahead of her while leaving her behind. No, it wasn't like this. There was more to their changes that were bothering her. Rather than moving ahead, it feels like they're moving back. Fuck. Suddenly ruffling her hair in frustration, Aoife and Evelyn both looked at her in confusion. What's wrong? It's nothing. It's no. Kira's words stopped abruptly as her hand, which had been raised to dismiss them, lowered. At the same time, she slowly bit her lips as she looked back at the two. For the first time since entering the room, they were both looking at her. I feel like the two of you have changed a lot. She decided to come clean with her thoughts. It felt so unlike her, and at the same time she felt like cringing, but for some reason she just felt like doing so. What are you talking about? Isn't it obvious that we've both changed? People grow up. We've gone through a lot. Aoife glanced at Evelyn, who remained quiet, but the silence was enough to speak volumes. I know. Kira's leg tapped rapidly against the ground. I'm not saying that you're wrong. Everyone has gone through a lot of shit, and as we grow, we all change. That, I do understand. Then? But it's different. Kira ruffled her hair once more, mumbling something along the lines of, fuck. Why is it so hard to express shit? It's fucking cringe. But eventually, she looked back at them. In particular, she looked at Evelyn. I feel like you're forcing them. Aoife's brows shot up while Evelyn's brows furrowed. Before either of them could say a thing, Kira continued. I'm not denying what you've gone through. You already gave us a rundown, and while everything you went through does suck, at the end of the day, I have a feeling that you're doing this out of self-protection rather than anything else. Kira held her palm forward. She looked at it as the two remained silent. I'm sure that you two are now well aware of our situations. Evelyn in particular. We're not normal. We're cursed. The room stilled for a brief moment, almost as if something was trying to peer at them. The more we grow in age, the more the curse will corrupt us. For now, Julian has managed to contain whatever this bullshit is. But for how long can he do that? This shit feeds on our emotions, our instability, our everything. Kira's palm trembled slightly. As it did, she slowly raised her head to look at Evelyn. You're suppressing yourself. Evelyn's face remained stoic. Not because you don't feel, but because you're trying to escape whatever pain that you felt in the moment that you were alone. You probably don't want to experience it again and shut yourself off. I get it. Kira reached for her pocket, taking out an all too familiar cigarette before lighting it up and taking a puff. Puff. She didn't smoke a lot. At least not as much as she did in the past. But from time to time it was needed. It helped her calm down. It had always been like this. I get why you're doing this. I get why you don't want to get hurt. But that's just not it. Kira looked at Evelyn while taking another drag. Puff. If you seal yourself off, you're only escaping from potential pain. If what we know about this strange curse is true, and our minds grow progressively more irrational, then the best thing you can do isn't to shut yourself down, but to embrace the pain. Kira suddenly closed her eyes. Pitch-black darkness greeted her vision. In spite of this, within the darkness, it was almost as if she could see it. the smoke that lingered from the tip of her cigarette as she brought the cigarette to her lips and savored it. At the same time, certain memories flashed into her mind. Her aunt, her mother, her father, and everything that had happened in her youth. Puff. If you just run away from the pain, you'll also run away from the growth it gives us. And it's... Fuck. I'm shivering. And it's this growth that we need more than ever, because we're at a point where our minds need to be strong. Kira opened her eyes. A pair of purple met hers. If you just hide, then nothing will come of the situation. Your mind will not be any different than before, and if anything similar happens, you'll just break. Kira tapped her temple. You can't break. She looked at Aoife. Neither can you. She paused. And neither can I. Flicking what remained of the cigarette, Kira stood up while walking towards Evelyn. She stopped right before her bed while looking down on her. Oi, bitch. And of course she cursed. Wake the fuck up. Evelyn remained silent, her purple eyes staring back at her in silence. Still pretending? Kira raised her hand, ready to strike at her. But just as she was about to strike down, Evelyn's lips parted. How? Her voice came out hoarse, her lips trembling slightly. Clenching her chest, her lips trembled further. How? The fuck do I make this pain stop? How do I even handle this? It's too much. I don't. After a pause, she added, bitch. And to that Kira smiled. I know. Chapter 863. Gate Warden 1. HAA. Ha! The sound didn't arrive all at once. It rolled in, stretched thin, as if time itself had been pulled taut. Ha! HAA. Each cheer warped into the next, a distorted sound that pressed against the mind rather than the ears. The arena glowed under the heat, air bent above the sand, blurring the edges of everything. Figures in the stands moved like shadows behind glass, their raised arms slow, almost weightlessly, as if they were all moving in slow motion. Grains of sand lifted with each faint tremor, drifting lazily before settling again. Some stuck where they shouldn't have, clinging to something darker, something wet. The color spread in uneven patterns, soaking deeper with every passing second, turning the golden floor into something darker. Red? A weapon lay a short distance away, half buried beneath the stained sand, its edge catching the light in brief, flickering flashes. A sword? Close to it was a certain shadow, one that felt central to the scene. From the sword to the red surrounding it, it hadn't fallen in any dramatic sprawl, nor twisted in some strange way. It was just still. The kind of stillness that made one feel as though they were nothing but an object. As if it wasn't alive. The cheers only grew louder, and as everything processed in my mind, my eyes opened. I blankly stared at the ceiling above me. Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! Without even realizing it, my hand had reached for my shirt, sweat dripping down the sides of my face as I turned my head to look at Leon. He was sleeping soundly. But as I stared at him, I blinked several more times. Why is it so hot? Eventually, my eyes drifted to the open window, and I sat up in bed. Naturally, I closed the window before moving back towards Leon, where I reached for my pillow and gently placed it over his head. Then, I pressed down. His body immediately flinched as his eyes snapped open, but I didn't care as I continued to press down. Since you want to kill me so bad, I'll do you one solid and kill you first. As I slowly let out a breath, my thoughts drifted to the pool that had formed on my bed. For some reason, my mind throbbed as I stared at it, almost as if I were forgetting something. Did I dream of something? Honestly, I wasn't sure. But at some point, I gave up. Regardless of how much I tried to recall, I couldn't. In the end, the only thing I could do was end Leon. Given that we only had 24 hours in this place, we only rested for several hours before leaving. Thanks to what Leon managed to learn from Noelle, he was able to heal up rather quickly, although his face was still pale. The girls were strangely quiet as we met them. However, I didn't say anything since it didn't look like they had fought. And Evelyn's eyes are rather puffy. Did she cry? I scratched the side of my neck before going out of the place that we were in. The goal was simple. I needed to find more information about Noelle and where he was being held. I also needed a clearer understanding of the situation within the city and the best way to reach him. As things stood, rescuing him was impossible. However, there was time. I also had a plan in mind. What do you think we should do? I don't think we'll be able to find the information that we want in less than a day. Should we try to become merchants? Listening to Anne's proposal, I felt tempted. We certainly had the items to become merchants, but I soon shook my head. Unfortunately, no. Why? Because it'll attract too much attention. The items that we had for trade weren't ordinary. They either came from the outside world or the remnant south. It would essentially give our identities away. Then what do you think we should do? Staring at Inaz, I pursed my lips before answering, honestly, I'm thinking of becoming a gate warden. What? And gave me a strange look. Did you not hear what I said before? Of all jobs, that's the shittiest that you can take. You'll be fighting monsters every day with little... as if realizing something and stopped. Yes. Pay is irrelevant to me. I already had all the food that I wanted. I didn't care at all about food. In fact, my goal was simple. I wanted to use the chance to train. After uncovering the truth behind the monsters and their blood, I wanted to take my time absorbing more of it, completing the rune hidden within their blood. At the same time, however, my actions were limited. Despite escaping their sight for now, I knew that they'd eventually find me. I had no choice but to become a gate warden to blend with the world and escape their sight. I get what you're trying to do, but isn't your goal to find more information? If I get promoted, then I should be able to find out more. I had already seen the level of the gate wardens. They were strong, but not as strong as I was. I was confident I could handle things better than they did. This was even after I managed to suppress my strength. Although Noel's situation is urgent, I still have time. There's no need to rush things. I'll slowly get promoted while improving my strength before rescuing him. This was my plan, and as I looked at the others, Leon suddenly spoke up. I'm planning on joining the ranking battles. My head flicked in Leon's direction. Didn't we talk about this? Why was he suddenly saying this? Did he not hear me? I understand why you're concerned. However, I can simply fight without using my sword. I can also change the way that I look. In the end, I'm confident in being able to participate without getting caught. But what if you get caught? I won't. I rubbed my forehead, a dull headache beginning to form. This guy, as if sensing my thoughts, Leon spoke before I could say anything else. This is also the fastest way to get results. I know what your goal is, and if I rank at the very top, I'm confident I can find what you need. You may do well as a gate warden, but it would still take time before you earn any kind of promotion. Instead of saying anything, I just stared at Leon. For just a brief moment, a certain image flashed inside my mind. Arena, blood, sword. It lingered for a split second before it faded. After which, I found myself looking at him more intensely. Why? For what reason was he so adamant about going to the ranking battles? Was it worth the risk? Leon looked back at me, his expression unchanged. I can't change your mind, can I? Sorry. I closed my eyes, trying my best to resist the urge to curse. Honestly, I wanted to tell him to give up on the idea, especially with how high the risk was. But when I looked at him and saw the expression on his face, the words simply refused to leave my mouth. There was something about his current expression that made it hard for me to say anything. Actually, I think you should allow him. Evelyn suddenly spoke up. When I turned my attention to her, she stared back at me and then Leon. Honestly, he's got a point. The fastest way for us to achieve something would be through the ranking battles. They are dangerous, but it's also worth the risk. I trust that Leon is able to handle himself in a way that won't get him exposed. As someone who has known him for so long, I think you should trust him enough with this. That's not the point. Let me do it. Leon spoke up again, looking at me. Please. Everyone was looking at me. In a way, their gazes felt pressuring. And, fine. I knew that there was no point in saying anything else. Leon's mind looked to be made up. What else could I even say? I'll go sign up for the gate warden job. You take care of your thing. Without saying anything else, I turned away from the group and headed toward the city's entrance, and tried to reach out to me, asking if I wanted her to translate, but there was no need for that. I more or less had an idea of where I needed to go. Ruffling my hair, I continued ahead. I do hope things work out. Do you think he's angry? Kira asked as she looked in Julian's direction. The others remained silent, unsure of how to reply. However, it was Leon who replied for them as his lips pressed together. He isn't. He knew Julian well enough to understand that he wasn't angry. He was annoyed at best. That's good, I guess. Kira scratched the side of her neck as she looked back at Leon. As her mind drifted to the scenes she had witnessed earlier, her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you sure you want to do this? The fights are brutal, and the people competing are incredibly strong. The ones we saw were only around the 60th rank, and their power was already impressive, let alone those at the very top. I know. Leon had witnessed the entire thing. He wasn't blind. He knew that every participant was incredibly strong, with the people at the very top most likely stronger than him. He also knew that if he failed, he'd die. The previous match had made it obvious. Those who participated in the ranking matches had to put their lives on the line. But, I still have to do it. He thought back to everything that had happened. From the city of ice to the Sand Titan. Despite everything he had gone through in the years that Julian was gone, he thought he had improved a lot. And he had. He had reached a realm that he thought was good. But, I'm still useless. He was supposed to be Julian's knight. And yet, he was anything but useful. This isn't about the Sand Titan, is it? That monster was far stronger than any of us. His properties were also a terrible match for you. If that's not it. Leon just smiled as he looked at the others. I just need this. Yeah. He clenched his fist silently. I just need this. Honestly, the process of becoming a gate warden was much easier than I had imagined. Though that was partly because I used a few tricks here and there with my emotive magic. And because they were desperate for more gate wardens, I still managed to land the job. Standing not far from the gate, I positioned myself alongside several others, blending in among them. Ahead of us stood a tall man with a burly build and a bald head. His mere presence enough to overwhelm most people. From what I understood, he was the one in charge of the gate wardens. His strength wasn't too different from Leon's. Perhaps he was a little bit weaker. Kam Talek Sor Mean Tawuk. I still struggled with the language, but I could more or less understand what was being said. Sarah Talium Cellophane. After donning the dark uniform they had given me, I made my way toward the city's main gate. Along the way, I tried not to look too closely at the bodies scattered across the ground. Some motionless, others barely clinging to life. The smell of blood and dust hung heavily in the air. KRRR. Ahead of me, the massive gate groaned as it slowly opened, its heavy mechanisms grinding against the stone. A strong warm wind rushed through the widening gap, brushing against my face and carrying with it the dry scent of the desert beyond. Stepping out of the gate, my feet sank slightly into the sand, its lingering warmth seeping through the soles of my shoes. It'll be tough to fight in these conditions. I turned back to look at the towering walls behind me, noticing the countless scars carved into their surface, some shallow, others gouged deep into the stone. With the wind hissing as it blew in every direction, the gates groaned shut behind me. I glanced at the people standing beside the entrance. They remained perfectly still, lined along the wall, staring straight ahead without blinking, as if carved from stone. I followed their line of sight and stared ahead as the wind continued to howl, the cloth against my face flapping violently in the gusts. There was nothing as far as my eye could see, but at the same time, I could feel the numerous presences that hung in the air, staring in our general direction. I eyes mana sense, but still found nothing. That's when my gaze fell, towards the sand. I pressed my lips together as my breathing quickened slightly. Then, deaf, sight, the world turned black, and all noise ceased. In that moment, it felt as though I had been transported to a completely different place. Suddenly losing both sight and hearing, it felt as though I was alone in the world, as if there was no one else besides me. In a way, it felt scary. But, in order to understand a spell, I must subject myself to it. I took a deep breath, feeling the subtle vibrations coming from beneath me as threads shot out from my arms and sank into the sand. This wasn't just about hiding from the outer beings. It was about growth. In order to reach the next level, I had to push myself to the extreme. Chapter 864. Gate Warden 2. Threads filtered through the sand, shooting downward before spreading in every direction beneath the surface. They moved like veins through the earth, quietly branching out as the grains shifted and sank around them. Having lost my sense of hearing and sight, the threads were the only thing I could rely on to navigate through the sand. I haven't lost my sense of touch. I can still feel the vibrations. I should be able to tell what is happening through the... My thoughts came to an abrupt halt as I felt something shift beneath me. But by the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late. The sand beneath me suddenly gave way, and something shot upward and drove straight into me. Ugh! Pain shot through my back as I was hurled through the air, my body smashing violently against what was most likely the city wall. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, a dull shock rippling through my spine as stones scraped harshly against my back. Hyuk! Forcing a breath, I pushed myself up as I continued to expand the threads in every direction, trying to feel for something. Anything. But, bang! A powerful impact slammed into the side of my body, sending me hurtling away. The world spun as I crashed into the sand, grains exploding around me as my body skidded violently across the ground. The rough sand scraped against my skin and clothes, the force of it dragging me several meters before I finally began to slow. Shit! I lingered on the sand, its warm surface pressing against my body as darkness surrounded me on all sides. In that moment, everything seemed completely quiet as my hand grasped the coarse grains beneath me. For a brief second, time felt like it had stopped completely. almost as if I had suddenly been brought to a completely different place. Feeling the texture of the sand shift, growing rougher and damp beneath my fingers, I began to hear voices whisper in my mind, almost like distant cheers. For some reason, I found myself reaching forward, as if grasping for something. But there was nothing. Only sand met my touch as I blinked in confusion. What is? No, now is not the time. I punched the ground and forced myself up. At the same time, I instinctively looked around, only to quickly realize that everything was still dark. Silence lingered alongside the darkness, offering no hint of what surrounded me. Calm. I need to remain calm. Judging from the impact and the force behind the attack, the monster I was dealing with probably wasn't very strong. If it had been something more powerful, I would most likely have been in serious trouble. At the same time, I was certain that if a stronger monster had appeared, the city would have already raised an alarm. Where is it? Where is it? Seeing as mana sense wasn't working, the monster was most likely in the sand beneath. Waiting. I sank myself deeper into the darkness around me. The silence was absolute. The threads had now branched out, spreading across a significant distance. My ear twitched as I slowly sank into the sand, keeping my body perfectly still as I waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Trapped in darkness and silence, it felt as though I was completely alone, as though I were standing in the middle of a vast ocean, slowly sinking deeper while invisible predators circled from every direction. And just as the suffocating pressure began to close in around me, I suddenly felt something. There! I slammed my foot into the sand, sending it spraying in every direction as the threads shot upward, weaving into a net around me. The moment I felt something brush against one of the threads, I immediately lunged in that direction. Everything happened in an instant. As my hand grazed what felt like the outer layer of something incredibly hard, I activated Outer Hand. In that same moment, the mana inside my body drained rapidly, and the sensation vanished as the creature slipped away from my grasp. But that was enough. Thump. Feeling the vibration coming from beside me, I immediately rushed in that direction, reaching out again to touch its body as I activated Outer Hand once more. Although the skill had changed compared to how it once was, it was still a powerful curse spell. In fact, it felt even stronger now. The moment my hand touched the monster's rough outer shell, I felt its body jolt and squirm violently beneath my grasp, as if the curse had burrowed straight into it. I didn't waste the opportunity. Clenching my hand, I held tightly onto the monster's body as I continued to activate Outer Hand, pouring the curse into it again and again. At the same time, the threads surged around it, tightening and slicing through its body as they cut it apart piece by piece. A moment later, I felt something warm and wet splash against my hand. The monster squirmed once more, but its resistance merely lasted a few seconds before it stopped. Ha! Ha! Once I was finally certain it was dead, I stumbled back, taking deep, steady breaths as I tried to regain my balance. Even then, I didn't forget to sink my threads into the ground around me, spreading them through the sand to make sure nothing could ambush me again. That was a lot harder than I thought. Reaching ahead to touch the blood, I tried to sense anything related to the rune that it contained. It was faint, but I did feel something, and in that instant, I started to absorb whatever was present. A notification flashed across my vision. EXP plus 0.001%. It wasn't anything exceptional. However, the more blood that I absorbed, the more notifications like these appeared. I wasn't just limited to one notification. I can feel it. My strength is slowly increasing. But that's not all. I can feel the rune as well. If I can just grasp the outline of its structure, I might be able to use it myself. But what sort of rune was this? What did it do? And why did it exist in the monster's body? Are the monsters creations of the outer beings? Yes, this would make sense. Or is there more to it that I don't know? Just then, I froze, raising my head as my entire body tensed. For a moment I thought I had felt it. Presence. However, nothing. The sensation vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared. Still, I remained tense as I began scanning the surroundings with mana sense, while at the same time spreading my threads even farther through the sand, probing the area in every direction for any sign of movement. Still nothing. I frowned. To be honest, I wasn't even sure if I had imagined it. Unable to see or hear, the only thing I could rely on was my sense of touch. It was true that I had become far more sensitive to my surroundings after losing two of my most important senses. I shouldn't let my guard down. Standing up, I turned toward where the other wardens were. Their location was clear, as mana sense picked up their presence without any trouble. But just as I had taken a single step forward, something beneath me stirred. Something else jumped up at me. Signing up for the ranking battle was not easy. In fact, the process was a lot more difficult than originally anticipated. One couldn't simply challenge a ranker because they wanted to. There was a process that one had to follow. Bang! A pair of fists collided, the sheer force of the impact sending out a circular wave of pressurized wind. The two figures staggered back from the clash, the ground shattering under their steps. Leon stared ahead, his breathing steady as he looked down at his fist, still red from the sheer force of the collision. Then he lifted his gaze toward his opponent, whose hulking figure towered several meters above him. Unlike Leon, the man's breathing was rough and uneven, his chest heaving as bruises covered nearly every part of his body. This is tough. Leon loosened his fist. Felt weird not to fight using a sword. However, in order to avoid giving away his identity, he had no choice but to go this far. He had changed his appearance completely. To better fit the role, he had deliberately shaved his once lustrous hair into a rough buzz cut, while his entire body had been darkened by a deep tan. At the same time, he also changed his facial structure. After everything he had done, he was confident he wouldn't get caught. Kurak Tuam Sarek. Lifting his head, Leon looked at his opponent. The man seemed to be saying something, his lips moving as he spoke, but Leon couldn't quite understand what he had said as he briefly glanced around him. Unlike the ranking battles, there was no arena here. No crowd, no noise, and no towering stands filled with spectators. The place was closed off and dim. The floor beneath them was cracked and stained with layers of dried blood, the marks of countless previous battles etched into the stone. At the edge of the room sat the overseer, watching the fight with clear disinterest. His body lounged lazily in the chair, one elbow resting on the armrest as he propped his cheek against his fist. His eyes half-lidded as if the entire scene barely managed to hold his attention. Leon tore his gaze away from the overseer and focused back on his opponent. For a brief moment, the two simply stared at one another. Then, as if they had silently agreed on the same thing, they both burst forward at the same time. Bang! Their fists collided once more. The impact cracked through the room like a thunderclap, a ring of pressurized wind blasting outward and kicking dust and dried blood from the floor. Leon moved immediately after the clash. Twisting his hips, he followed with a sharp kick aimed at his opponent's side. The man shifted his weight and slipped past it with surprising ease, the kick cutting through empty air. In the same motion, the opponent swung a hook from below. Leon's eyes flickered. He tilted his head just enough for the fist to whistle past his face, feeling the rush of air brush against his cheek. Without giving the man a moment to recover, Leon drove his knee forward. The entire exchange lasted less than a second. The two moved without hesitation, striking at one another with relentless speed and no regard for restraint. At first, Leon controlled the pace of the fight. His eyes followed every movement, reading his opponent's attacks and slipping past them with precise, efficient motions. But after a while, the rhythm began to change. His opponent grew increasingly desperate, abandoning all semblance of caution. Blows came wilder and heavier, the man disregarding his own body just for the chance to land a single strike against Leon. Sweat gathered along the side of Leon's face as he struggled to adjust to the sudden change in his opponent's rhythm. His opponent lunged forward again, drawing another attack. Leon shifted his stance and prepared to counter, but then his eyes widened. Instead of defending, the man deliberately raised his shoulder, exposing himself and allowing Leon's strike to land. At the same time, his own fist crashed into Leon's shoulder, the two blows landing almost simultaneously. Shit! Bang! Leon staggered back, clutching his shoulder as a faint crack echoed from within it. Pain shot down his arm, forcing his grip to tighten as he struggled to steady himself. His opponent wasn't faring any better. Leon's strike had clearly landed cleanly, the man's body twisting slightly from the impact. But Leon barely had time to register it. In the next instant, the man was already rushing toward him again. He wasn't giving Leon even a moment to breathe. As Leon stared at his opponent, he quickly realized the difference between them. Despite the gap in their strength, Leon lacked the same hunger burning in the man's eyes. Unlike his opponent, he wasn't desperate to win. He already had a home. He had money. He had food. He wasn't like his opponent who fought to live. Leon's teeth clenched tightly at the thought. Damn it! Staring at his opponent, Leon surged forward once more. This time, he refused to flinch beneath the man's desperate attacks. He met them head-on, enduring the blows as he answered each one with a counter of his own. The rhythm changed once more. Leon began to gain the advantage. As the two exchanged blows once more, Leon fixed his opponent with a sharp glare and raised his fist to strike again, only to stop when the man suddenly stopped. At the same time, the overseer raised a brow as Leon's opponent began to wobble on his feet. Then, thump, he fell face-first against the floor. Chapter 865. Leon's struggle and ha! Ha! Leon took several breaths, slowly recovering his stamina as he stared at the body lying before him. I did it. His fist clenched silently as he continued to stare at the body. A small part of him was excited, but at the same time, there was another part of him that felt the complete opposite. I won. But the fight was way harder than it was supposed to be. This should have been easy if I had my sword and gone all out. No, that's not quite right. At some point, Leon realized he was starting to make excuses. His opponent was weaker than him, yet he still managed to force Leon into a bitter struggle. It was this very idea that made his chest feel heavy. He also understood all too clearly the reason why his opponent was able to push him this far. He simply wanted it more. No, I want it too. Taking a deep breath, Leon turned his attention toward the overseer, who walked over to the fallen body and stomped his foot down on its head. Bang! Watching the man's head explode before his very eyes, Leon's eyes widened in shock. He stared at the overseer, who had already shifted his attention toward him. Without a word, the man pointed toward the main door of the room as it slowly began to open. A low grinding sound echoed from the massive stone doors as they slowly opened. Several silhouettes appeared behind them, and the moment Leon caught sight of them, his entire body froze. Abba! ABBA! Two young children. One looked to be a young boy no older than 5, while the girl seemed only a year older. Both wore tattered clothes, their thin frames frail and gaunt. The moment they caught sight of the figure on the ground, they rushed in its direction, surrounded its body, and wailed. Abba! Abba! Leon didn't know their language, but he could understand. He understood it all as his world began to spin, his stomach churning, and his expression paling. Saran Tool! It was the overseer's loud voice that finally shook him out of that state, urging him to leave the room. Leon's lips parted, his bottom lip trembling as he stared at the children. However, seeing the overseer still glaring at him, Leon said nothing more and slowly made his way out of the room. The children's mournful cries echoed behind him as he walked, each sound making his lips tremble slightly. His gaze eventually lifted and fell upon the figure waiting for him at the end of the hall. Everyone who fights here does so to survive. Those who join the ranking battles don't do it for honor. They do it out of desperation. They fight because they need to provide for their children. Leon felt something heavy press against his chest. The weight of it made it hard for him to speak. Yet, as the muffled cries of the children continued to echo behind him, he found himself asking one simple question. To the children. What? They'll be kicked out of the city. Most likely, they'll die in a few hours. And replied coolly, and the heaviness in Leon's chest grew. This all happened because you defeated their father, their only provider. And it won't be the last time something like this happens. Most of the people you fight in the coming days will likely be in the same situation. They're not here for the same reason you are. They're not here to prove themselves. They're here to fight for their family, for their lives. This isn't a simple game. This is the reality of the mirror dimension. Anne's words struck Leon's mind like a thunderclap. They echoed through his thoughts again and again, reverberating like the pounding of distant drums. Before he even realized what was happening, the heavy pressure in his chest suddenly surged upward. His breathing grew uneven as he staggered toward the wall, reaching out to steady himself against the cold stone. Hunching over, he gagged and then vomited. Irk! Puke spilled across the ground as Anne watched him in silence. Leon's face grew even paler, his body trembling slightly as more bile spilled from his lips. Her words were harsh, yes, but this was the reality of the mirror dimension. She had to say all of this for him to understand. There was no mercy in this place. This wasn't a world where someone as kind-hearted as he could survive. She had to show him the reality of things so that he could face it. That being said, even though I'm used to this place, I don't like the situation here. Even in the remnant south, things weren't this bad. And had already arranged a few things with Anaz to take care of the children. But she wasn't sure she wanted to tell Leon about it. In a way, he needed this, to force himself to confront the reality of this place and change his mindset. This wasn't a game. This was reality. This was the mirror dimension. One couldn't simply come here expecting anything else but this. Wekurg! As Leon continued to vomit, and glanced back toward the room he had just come out of. The doors were already closed. Shifting her attention back to him, she muttered, "Clean up when you're done. Your next fight will be in a few hours." To qualify for the ranking battles, one first had to defeat 20 opponents of similar level. Each match allowed only a few hours of rest before the next. It tested not only endurance, but also the sheer willpower of every contestant. If Leon really wanted to go through with this, then he had to push himself to the absolute limits. There's still time for you to stop. The fights are to the death. The deeper you go, the harder it becomes to walk away. You'll shed a lot more blood, and more children will be left orphaned, which is no different from condemning them to die. I suggest you think carefully before stepping back in. And didn't say much more. She understood there was no need to say anything more. Leon seemed to understand her words as he remained hunched over against the wall, and gave him one last look before turning and leaving. Hopefully, this should open his eyes more. Ugh! Feeling the cold, coarse texture of the wall beneath his hand, Leon remained hunched over, leaning heavily against it. The vomiting had finally stopped, but his breathing was still uneven. His vision remained blurry, the hallway around him swaying slightly as his head felt light and hollow. The sour taste lingered in his mouth, and the echoes of the children's cries still rang faintly in his ears. What am I even doing? Thinking back on everything that had just happened, Leon realized that and was right. The further he continued down this path, the more situations like this would unfold before him. If he was already reduced to vomiting after the very first fight, what would happen after the next one? Or the one after that? This wouldn't be the first time a situation would occur. He'd be naive to think so. He knew that everyone who participated was in a similar situation. But what about him? He wasn't as desperate as they were. He didn't need this as much as they did. If he simply gave up, then maybe someone else could survive. Maybe. Shit. Covering his lips, Leon glanced around before pushing himself away from the wall. His body felt heavy, and each step seemed heavier than the last as he began to walk without any real direction. He didn't know where he was going. Still, as he wandered through the city, his gaze slowly began to drift over his surroundings. He looked at the people passing by, and at the worn houses lining the streets. He stared at the worn-out people, the bodies lying motionless on the ground, and the poverty that seemed to seep through every corner of the place. He knew it wasn't all like this. He understood that the higher levels of the city were far better. But the more he looked around, the more suffocating the situation began to feel, the despair of this place settling deeper into his chest. How can anyone survive like this? He watched as people scavenged through bodies and piles of litter. He watched them struggle just to find water. They were ragged and gaunt, their bodies covered in countless scars. Many of the figures looked like young children, their thin frames barely able to stand. The more he stared, the more his stomach churned. This place truly felt like hell on earth. Thump, 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 thump. Suddenly, Leon's head lifted as a loud drumming sound echoed through the air. The deep, rhythmic pounding rolled across the city like distant thunder. At once, every citizen stopped what they were doing. Heads lifted in unison, their eyes turning toward the same direction. Thump, thump, thump. With each heavy beat, the ground itself seemed to tremble, the entire place shaking faintly as the sound continued to reverberate through the streets. Already familiar with the process, Leon's gaze shifted toward the projections that began appearing throughout the area. Moments later, two figures materialized within them. In an instant, the place quaked. Darim! Darim! Ishma! 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 Hearing the chants and screams rising around him, Leon's gaze paused on the malnourished children and the people who had looked half-dead only moments before. He watched as they slowly raised their weak hands, their voices hoarse as they joined the chanting, their hollow eyes fixed on the holograms floating in the air. They seemed to disregard their own conditions completely, their minds focused only on the fight unfolding before them, almost as if their life meant nothing before the fight. Ah, I see. Leon stared at everything in silence, his lips pressing together as he realized something. This city, it was not only the stone and streets that were broken, the people were broken too. In a place where survival stood above all things, pity was a luxury the weak could not afford. Only through strength could one be revered. Only through strength could anything hope to change. The more Leon watched, the more he realized where he was. This was Karatok, the lone city standing in the land of fire. Chapter 866. Leon's struggle, 2. Leon's inner dilemma continued. Pulling his gaze away from the ranking fight above him, Leon looked toward the people and the surroundings instead. He took in the fervor burning in their eyes, the way they cheered wildly each time blood spilled in the battle above them. Even those who looked as if they were on the verge of death seemed entranced by the fight above. As Leon continued to watch, he slowly came to a realization. On a fundamental level, the city was broken, and so were its people. Even if I don't participate and allow one to have a chance at success, they'll still eventually die. Leon looked up once more. The fight was slowly coming to an end. When Leon's gaze returned to the hologram, he watched as one of the warriors lunged forward and seized his opponent's jaw with both hands. With a brutal pull, he tore it open. Blood sprayed in every direction as the crowd erupted into feverish cheers. Wah! Ishma! Ishma! Ishama! The lower level erupted in cheers as the winner received his reward. His wounds began to heal slowly as he raised both hands into the air and let out a triumphant roar. Leon eventually tore his gaze away from the scene. Turning around, he began walking back toward the place he had come from. With every step he took, the cries of the children echoed through his mind, causing his lips to press into a tight line. Ha! With a long exhale, he felt his stomach churn once more. But this time, he didn't puke. His next fight was about to happen. He couldn't allow himself to be distracted. First, he planned on doing something for the children, and then, "Where are you going?" Hearing a familiar voice call out, Leon came to an abrupt stop. His steps faltered as the sound reached him, clear even through the lingering noise of the city. Slowly, he raised his head. Ahead of him, the cobblestone road sloped upward, rising to a slightly higher level of the street. Standing there, looking down at him from the elevated path, was N. "Your fight will begin in a few minutes. This isn't the path that leads to it. Are you planning to forfeit?" "I'm not." "Then?" "I was just thinking about the children. I wanted to. You're way too soft for this world." Leon blinked slowly, his eyes lingering on her for a moment. Eventually, a bitter smile formed on his lips. "I know." She didn't need to tell him this. He was quite well aware of it. "But you know, this isn't necessarily a bad thing." Anne's next words caught him off guard as he raised his head to look at her. "In a world where everyone devours one another, it isn't such a bad thing to have someone who doesn't think that way. I imagine it has a lot to do with the place you grew up in. But it isn't a bad way of seeing things. I don't think you should change that. At the same time, though, I don't think you should remain stuck where you are. If you truly want the situation to get better, then instead of pitying yourself, why not do something about it?" And looked straight at Leon as she spoke. Though she spoke at length, she did not truly mean most of what she said. Having grown up in the mirror dimension, everything that was happening seemed normal to her. She could not sympathize with his weak heart. Even so, seeing the state he was in, she knew she had to say something. A goal. A direction. That was what she wanted to give Leon. Even she wasn't sure why she was doing this much for someone she had only recently met. But thinking back to the state he had been in, she didn't think his weak heart was necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps it could even lead to something. If you don't like something, change it yourself. That's how we do things in the mirror dimension. Pointing behind her, she nudged her head. "If you're worried about the children, I had Inez take care of them. Your next battle is waiting for you. If you truly hate what you're seeing, then do something about it yourself. You can cry. You can puke. I don't really care. But if that's the extent of your resolve, then you might as well leave this place. The current you won't be of much use to Julian." Leon's face remained pale as he looked at Anne. However, he still ended up moving. Though her words seemed to stir him somewhat, they still weren't enough to drive away the doubt lingering in his mind. Change. Can I really change this place? Leon thought back to everything he had witnessed and felt his heart clench. He knew the answer already. It was impossible. But, at the very least, I don't want to be useless. As his knight, I have to be useful. I can't remain stuck where I am. I need to grow further. Moving ahead, Leon entered the trial grounds once more. A fight ensued not long after. There was hardly any break between battles. From the moment Leon signed himself up for the trial battles, he'd fight a new fight every hour to a couple of hours. Not only that, but each time he fought someone and won, he'd face a stronger opponent. Everyone was desperate. They all fought with their lives on the line, abandoning any semblance of rationality and attacking in the most reckless ways possible. Despite his clear advantages, Leon still began to struggle. Injuries accumulated with each fight, and as the battles dragged on from several minutes to even hours, he finally began to feel the toll on his body. Irk! Puking on the side of the road, Leon's legs wobbled as he nearly collapsed on the ground. If not for the soft hand keeping him upright, he would have long fallen. There's one more battle left. Are you sure you can keep up in the state that you're in? Leon raised his head, meeting a pair of purple eyes as she looked down at him from above. Her face was hidden behind a scarf, but he recognized her immediately from her voice and her eyes as he staggered, struggling to keep himself upright. Evelyn didn't do anything else. The best she did was offer him some food and water. Several days had passed since Leon had entered the ranking trials. In that time, he had barely slept, fighting endlessly and pushing his body into a pitiful state. Bruises covered him from head to toe, scars and fresh injuries scattered across his skin. By now, he had likely broken several bones as well. Normally, he would have been able to heal such injuries without much trouble. But in his exhausted state, he could barely manage it. The wounds continued to pile up, and as the final fight approached, he was in no condition to fight properly. You! Taking a moment to look at Evelyn, Leon caught his breath a couple of times before asking, "Are you not going to stop me?" Normally, Evelyn would have been the first one to stop him. She would normally be the first to nag at him, telling him to stop pushing himself and that it wasn't worth it. But instead, she simply watched in silence, saying nothing. But soon her lips opened. "No." Her words made Leon freeze for a moment. "I'm not going to stop you, nor do I have any intention of stopping you." "Oh." Leon lowered his gaze to the ground, staring at what he had just thrown up. The thick bile slowly slid across the uneven surface of the broken road, seeping into the cracks between the stones. He remained there for a moment, watching it in silence as the sour taste lingered in his mouth and his body trembled faintly from exhaustion. Evelyn's voice whispered softly in the air. "I understand what it feels like to feel useless, to want to prove something." Leon raised his head, his eyes widening slightly as Evelyn's gaze was fixed elsewhere. "I'm not going to tell you to stop, because I know that trying to stop you would only do you more harm. The only thing I can do is offer you some water and food, and hope that you manage to succeed. That's..." Pausing, Evelyn looked back at him. "My way of supporting you." Krrr. A loud grating sound echoed as the doors slowly opened behind Leon, signaling the start of the final fight. In that moment, however, Leon didn't bother to look back. Instead, he kept staring into Evelyn's clear eyes. His gaze continued to linger over her before he eventually forced a smile. "Right?" He turned his head slowly, dragging his tired body into the trial room. "Thanks." Swoosh! Swoosh! The dunes rose several meters high, their slopes shifting endlessly under the relentless wind. Heat lingered heavily in the desert air, rising from the sand in wavering currents that distorted the horizon. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but an endless sea of sand stretching for hundreds of kilometers, broken only by the hollow howl of the wind sweeping across the barren land. But then, that stillness was broken. A lone figure stepped forward. His feet sank slightly into the loose sand with each step, leaving shallow impressions that were quickly swallowed by the shifting grains. Dark clothes fluttered around his body under the force of the wind, snapping and rustling against the vast silence of the desert. Gate wardens were not only responsible for protecting the gate, but were also occasionally sent out to scout the surrounding areas where several checkpoints had been established. As his feet sank into the sand, several threads shot down from his hand, spreading in every direction and weaving into a vast net beneath the surface. His pace was neither slow nor hurried. Yet the farther he walked, the steadier his steps became, until his feet barely sank into the shifting sand at all. Through the small gap in the cloth covering his face, a pair of closed eyes could be seen. His lips were dry and cracked, and his expression looked worn and haggard. Despite this, he continued ahead. The world within his mind was silent, his vision swallowed by darkness. He could neither see nor hear, yet the way he moved made it clear that he was aware of where he was going. By now, Julian had lost track of time. He didn't quite know how much time had passed, but he had grown more and more familiar with his surroundings, eventually becoming capable of dealing with whatever came at him. At the same time, he could feel his understanding of his spells steadily deepening. In the end, he even chose to sever his sense of smell. The more he adapted, the more he severed. Through this process, he could feel a tangible growth in his strength. But just as he continued walking forward, he suddenly slowed down. "HM?" Gradually, he raised his head. But nothing. Though faint, he had felt something. He immediately used mana sense, extending his threads in every direction beneath the sand. Yet even after searching the entire area, he couldn't find a single trace of anything. Am I growing sensitive? Julian didn't know it, but he remained alert as he passed by a certain figure, completely unaware of her gaze as he quietly moved past her. Chapter 867. A well-fabricated lie. 1. Julian's steps continued to sink into the sand, his breath calm and even as he moved through the endless desert. The checkpoint shouldn't be too far from here. I should almost be there. The more time he spent in the desert, the more he grew accustomed to the lack of senses. It had gotten to the point where he started to use mana sense less and less, and through such means, he was able to see outstanding improvement in his mastery over the spells. But it's still not enough. I should turn things up a notch soon. The growth had been significant, but it still wasn't to the extent he desired. Just then, he suddenly paused, sensing a faint shift in the land beneath. He suddenly stood still, basking in the silence as the world around him was completely dark. He stood completely still, waiting, his threads spread out in every direction as his feet slowly sank into the sand. The strong howl of the wind brushed against his face, yet Julian remained perfectly still. He continued to wait. His feet sank lower. Thump, thump, something was coming. It was drawing closer as he felt the vibration in his feet. Thump, his threads continued to expand. And soon, The sand beneath him suddenly gave way. Julian didn't hesitate for even a second. He drove his foot down hard and kicked himself up into the air. At the same time, his body twisted as threads shot out in every direction and several chains sprang out from his arm, forming a shield. Clank! Sparks flew as the shield came in contact with something powerful. Julian's body was pushed several meters in the air as he lost his sense of direction, the threads unable to help him find his bearings. Despite this, he didn't panic. Instead, he doubled down, spreading even more threads around him. They stretched outward in every direction, forming a massive net across the area. The moment he felt something brush against the threads, he reacted immediately. There! A magic circle formed in his hand. At the same time, hands shot out from the sand beneath, circling over where Julian presumed the creature to be. Thud! Landing onto the sand, Julian felt something as he turned his head. His brows furrowed. However, regardless of where he looked, he didn't feel a single thing. He didn't see the figure that stood right before him, her dark eyes looking down on him as he shifted his head from left to right, his face slightly tense as he found himself lost within the world of darkness. Under the strong howl of the wind, the woman's clothes and hair remained perfectly still, while her flawless features stayed fixed on him. Am I imagining things? No, I should still be cautious. Slowly, her arms moved forward, reaching towards his neck as they started to tremble. But just as her hands were about to grasp his neck, she stopped. Her expression changed subtly as she stared at the man in front of her. Something within her chest stirred at the sight of him, but the darkness within her mind made it hard for her to properly remember. It was consuming every part of her. Who is he? Her eyes slowly blinked. Memories started to surface in that moment. Memories that she had forgotten about. He's. Her thumb slowly traced the ring on her finger, gently massaging its surface. Eventually, however, she stopped, especially when she took note of the owl that rested on his shoulder as it stared right back at her. Swoosh! Her figure collapsed inwardly, fading completely as the owl continued to stare in her direction. Eventually, human, she was here. The owl's voice reached Julian's mind. His expression didn't change despite the news. I know. In fact, he had known all along. She might deceive his mana sense, but not his emotive magic. He could see the jumbled and chaotic mess that stood before him. Despite this, he didn't say or do anything, for he knew that her mind wasn't stable enough to handle a proper conversation with him. I need to hurry. Julian continued to walk ahead, a rune forming in his hand. I really need to hurry. Hey, Emmett. His back faced him, his features hidden as he looked out over the cityscape below. A cigarette rested between his fingers as he took a slow, quiet drag. Thin tendrils of smoke lingered in the air as a young teen stood behind him. The young teen waited patiently, watching the man standing before him. The man seemed almost entranced, his eyes reflecting the slow movement of the cars far below. After a while, he finally snapped out of it and took a quiet drag from his cigarette. Though his movements were smooth, the slight tremble in his hand did not escape the young teen's notice, causing his expression to tighten. Puff! As smoke drifted in the air once more, a soft voice whispered in the air. This power is merely a shared power. To whom he was speaking, the young boy wasn't sure. Still, he remained standing there, his eyes fixed on the man's back. We've somehow managed to integrate the runes into our bodies, but ultimately our vessels aren't strong enough to contain that kind of power. Our minds are slowly being affected, and the more we use this power, the more it takes from us. Yet, Puff, we have no choice but to hold onto this power, even if it breaks us down. This isn't out of necessity, but desperation. If we ever hope to defeat them, then we must cling to this power, no matter the cost. But will it be enough? The young boy couldn't help but ask, his gaze fixed on the thin tendrils of smoke drifting away from the cigarette. If we cling to this power, will we be able to defeat them? No. There was no hesitation in the voice. We'll not be able to. The young boy's face trembled, but Emmett's remained calm. He continued to stare at the cityscape below, his eyes gradually growing hazy once more. We'll never be able to defeat them if we cling to this power. The pale sun bled weakly through the land beneath, its light thin and sickly as it seeped into the endless gray sky. What little radiance it cast failed to brighten the world below. It only washed the land in lifeless shades of gray. The air hung heavy, as though the sky itself pressed down upon the earth with unbearable weight. Beneath that suffocating sky, a lone figure lay still, staring upward at the pale disk of the sun with a certain leisure. To others, there was nothing unusual, just the dull glow of ordinary daylight. But to him, the truth was something that couldn't escape his gaze. His eyes could see through the well-crafted veil that looked like the sun. That sun was nothing more than an eye, a vast, blasphemous eye that humanity, in its pitiful ignorance, had chosen to call the sun. Its radiance spilled across the land, bleaching the world in a suffocating glow. Yet behind that brightness lurked something far older than light itself. Something ancient. The great orb did not shine. It watched. It watched without blinking. It always had. A gaze older than memory, wider than the scope of human thought, resting silently upon the crawling insignificance of the world below. And he knew it had never once looked away. Nothing within the mirror dimension escaped the ancient being's gaze. Not the trembling grass. Not the faint creak of branches bending beneath a wind. Not the quiet breath of those who tried to crawl their way to survival. All was within its realm. The wind was nothing but its breath. The ground was nothing but its flesh. And the prison men called the mirror dimension was nothing more than a mask. The sun, the sky, the earth, even the very air he breathed. All of it was a lie, a system, a cage designed not merely to confine them, but to ensure that they never escaped their watch. How pitiful we are. Extending his hand, the air before him wavered and distorted. Slowly, faint strokes began to appear, one after another, each line forming with careful precision as they connected together to shape a rune. It's not yet completed, but it's almost there. His voice carried a rare warmth, one that felt strangely out of place in the world around him. He continued to stare at the rune in his hand as it slowly began to glow, the mana inside of his body fading as his eyes closed and images flashed across his mind. Past, present, future. He saw glimpses of everything as the rune continued to glow. An unknown amount of time passed before he opened his eyes again, and the rune in his grasp faded completely. Well, I guess it can't be helped. I'm still not quite there yet. He wasn't in a rush. He knew that it wouldn't be long until he finalized the rune. By then, he'd probably be able to take the next step. Isn't that right, Emmett? A chuckle escaped his lips as he lowered his hand. Lying on the broken, cracked earth, he remained still, quietly closing his eyes as voices whispered inside his head. Cries, laughter, and countless other sounds blended together, forming a chaotic murmur that filled his mind. Yet he did not resist it. He simply absorbed it all. He could feel the emotions lingering in the air around him. Thin tendrils of different colors drifted toward him, slowly gathering as if drawn by him. Torin quietly absorbed the emotions lingering in the air as his eyes grew hazy. At the same time, his mind began to drift toward a certain memory. A smile lingered on his features. I couldn't understand in the past, but I understand now. Just how far ahead were you seeing? The smile continued to hang on Torin's lips as he quietly closed his eyes. Ultimately, this is merely borrowed power. No, it's not even accurate to say that. The power they wielded was the same power that they used. In a sense, they were taking a share that rightfully belonged to them. If each source of power were a bucket of water, then they had merely taken a few cups for themselves while they still held the rest of the bucket. The power was finite, and the more they took, the less share they had. Ultimately, the only way to defeat them was to create a power of their own within the source. An entirely different and untainted sub-branch. A new bucket of water. Torin chuckled softly, his attention fixed on the numerous orbs floating deep within his body. They shimmered in many different colors, drifting slowly in the darkness. Yet among them, he could feel that a few shone far brighter than the rest. They represented the 6 primary emotions, each accompanied by the many branching emotions that stemmed from them. The deeper Torin's understanding of emotions grew, the more branches began to form. The path of emotions seemed endless, with new ones revealing themselves to him every single day. But at the same time, as his understanding deepened, he started to see an end to it. He could see the source of it. He was close, but not quite. Soon. His lips slowly stretched into a wider smile as his gaze climbed toward the sun above. As if sensing his attention, the sun flickered faintly. The great eye shifted, turning its focus toward him. Torin only smiled. Then casually he raised his hand and waved. Chapter 868. A well-fabricated lie, 2. How are you feeling? Are you sure you can keep going like this? You don't look so well. I am fine. Leon tried his best to sound calm, but his half-beat late response made her frown as she looked at him. Leon wasn't fooling anyone. Not only was his face relatively pale, but the injuries that he had sustained were still clear to see. And opened her mouth to say something, but soon stopped as she looked behind her, taking note of the others following from behind. The group walked ahead, heading toward the massive pillar that stood at the center of the city. The street leading to it rose slightly, lined with dilapidated houses with worn walls and sagging roofs. The road gradually widened as they drew closer to the structure, the number of people growing more sparse as the stench that had lingered in the air began to disperse. Eventually, the road led to tall metal gates that rose several meters into the air. their dark bars reinforced and tightly set, encircling the massive pillar at the center. Several guards stood at the front, dressed in gray uniforms, resembling those of the gate wardens and Namen, keeping a watchful eye over anyone who approached, their presence firm. "I'll go," and stepped forward, interacting with the guards as she displayed a certain token to them. The token was nothing special, carrying a few intricate patterns, but the moment she pulled it out, the guards' backs straightened. They glanced in Leon's direction before stepping aside, allowing the gates to open. There was a certain level of respect in the guards' gazes as Leon and the others passed by, prompting Kira to comment. "Looks like you've got some fans." "Makes sense if you think about it," Aoife said, her attention fixed on the distant pillar. "This place respects the strong, and with Leon having just qualified to participate in these so-called ranked battles, it makes sense for them to look at him like this." "I guess." Kira shrugged her shoulders. The group continued forward, meeting more guards as they made their way toward the pillar, and led the way the entire time, and as it drew closer, Leon couldn't help but admire the intricate structure. From up close, the pillar felt even more imposing, its surface layered with platforms, protruding walkways, and interconnected structures that seemed to merge into the skyline itself. Pipes, support beams, and reinforced segments wrapped around it in complex patterns, giving the impression of a self-contained city rising within the city. Leon tilted his head back to look up, feeling the imposing weight of the structure as it towered overhead, casting a vast shadow that stretched across the streets below. Despite the imposing exterior, the interior was surprisingly crude, centered around a massive spiraling staircase that wound upward along the pillar's core. And the others moved ahead, their footsteps echoing against the hard surfaces as they climbed in silence, the steady rhythm of their ascent filling the open space around them. Leon followed in silence, trying his best to keep his breath steady. He focused all his attention on healing his injuries. "Julian, something about runes. To heal my injuries, I need to feel the rune to heal myself properly. I know I can do it. I've already felt it before." Leon tried his best to feel the connection, focusing on healing the injuries he had sustained as they climbed the stairs. But it wasn't long before the others stopped, and when he raised his head once more, his breath caught in his throat. No door stood at the entrance of the second level, allowing him to see far ahead. Through the open passage, he could make out numerous buildings stretching in all directions, arranged in structured rows around a vast central plaza. Walkways connected the structures in an organized network, and banners and signs hung from several facades, adding color to the otherwise monotone city. Crowds moved through the area in steady streams, their clothing far more refined than that of those in the lower levels, the difference in quality immediately noticeable in the fabrics and tailored designs. Looking up, Leon found the gray sky to be clearer here, sunlight filtering down more freely as the upper level no longer covered as much of the horizon, allowing brighter light to spill across the plaza below. The difference between this place and the lower level is almost night and day. Anne's words brought Leon out of his thoughts as she looked around, her expression calm. "Thanks to Leon getting a rank, we're all able to stay here. However, just because this place seems a lot better, don't assume that it's safer than the lower level. In fact, it's much more dangerous. Everyone here is incredibly strong, unlike the lower levels." And turned her attention towards Leon. She stared at his pale face and features and placed her hand over his shoulder. "We've gotten a residence to stay thanks to you, but I'm afraid that you won't have much time to rest." "Huh. The situation here is even more ruthless than the one beneath. Every resource on the second level is even more important, and if you can't prove your worth to the city, then you won't be able to stay much longer. You have exactly 1 day before issuing a challenge and making it to the rankings. If by then you can't fight, we'll be kicked back down to the lower levels, unable to qualify for a ranking battle for at least a month." "What?" Leon's eyes widened, unable to hide his shock. "But I know." Anne's voice was grave as she sighed. "I know you're tired and haven't fully healed from your injuries, but this is how the city operates. It doesn't wait for anyone. I suggest you use the little time you have to recover while carefully selecting your opponent." And proceeded to share more information with him as they walked out of the pillar, eventually reaching the familiar fence that surrounded its perimeter. As they stepped beyond it, they felt the gazes of those around them turn in their direction, the air growing noticeably tense. Thankfully, everyone had disguised themselves in advance, allowing them to blend in with the crowd, as Anne continued to explain the situation to Leon. "Things won't get easier even when you get a rank. The moment you get a rank, you will immediately be challenged by someone for that position. You can't refuse the battle request, and the most you'll get is a couple of hours of preparation. Therefore, you mustn't show any weakness while you fight." Eventually, they reached the residence, and continued explaining the entire situation to Leon. She went on about the rules and everything she had learned, speaking in detail as she recounted each point. Leon tried to listen attentively, but the more he heard, the grimmer his expression became. This is beyond ruthless. From what he understood, his life would only grow harder from this moment on. He had all the luxuries, but he would have to stake his life every day to maintain them. Still, Leon silently clenched his fists. I can persist. Separating from Anne and the others, Leon entered his own room within the residence, which stood not far from the main plaza of the second level. The building's architecture was nothing fancy, resembling many of the surrounding houses in the area, simple and functional in design rather than ornate. Leon didn't pay much attention to the surroundings. He didn't have time to pay attention to it as he immediately went to his bed and slept, trying his best to replenish his energies while thinking about the thing called rune that Julian had mentioned to him. At the same time, he also selected an opponent and gave the details to Anne, who took care of the matter for him. Secretly, he was quite grateful for her help, but understanding his current situation, he could only thank her in his heart before going back to thinking about the rune. However, regardless of how much he tried to sense it, he struggled to do so. By the time he stopped thinking about it, the next day had already arrived, and with it came a knock at his door. To talk. Leon? Are you ready? Yes. Leon's eyes gradually opened as he walked out of his room. The others were already waiting outside, staring at him with a serious expression. He met their gaze individually before following and out of the place. Everything from that point onward felt like a blur. He remembered returning to the pillar, ascending once more, and then parting ways with Anne. Boom! A thundering noise shook him from his thoughts, and by the time he looked up, he found himself standing inside a vast arena. The dim gray sky and pale sun shone down from above, casting a muted light across the space, as his feet sank slightly into the sand scattered across the ground. Tall walls surrounded him on every side, rising high and enclosing the arena, while crowds gathered along the upper edges, leaning over the railings to stare down at him with a mix of cheers and boos. Surrounded from all sides, he felt like an animal. Minuscule, but at the same time he felt something within his chest stir. Something he couldn't quite understand stirred within him as he looked ahead, locking eyes with his opponent across the sandy arena. Ha! Leon let out a long breath, closing his eyes slightly as the noise faded from his mind. I guess this is it. I might really die if I'm careless. He could feel the heavy bloodlust lingering in the air, along with the strong scent of blood spreading in all directions. Opening his eyes again to stare at his opponent, Leon's body tensed. There's no going back for me. Why did you not do anything, human? Hearing Almighty's voice inside my mind, I could only smile bitterly. What do you even expect me to do in this situation? If you had talked with her, then you may have been able to stop her. That woman's skills are formidable. I'm sure they are. There was nothing to doubt about Delilah's skills. But that wasn't the problem. Her mind isn't stable. If I did say something, the consequences would have been disastrous. The fact that she didn't even notice you should be enough proof of that, right? Almighty couldn't see, but I could. The darkness that lingered within her. The emotions that stirred wildly inside her. At that moment, she was a bundle of every kind of feeling. It was in my best interest not to provoke her. Just a tiny bit was enough to ignite everything. And I didn't know what would happen then. Therefore, it was best to just do nothing. I see. Although Almighty's voice still held a trace of doubt, it didn't press on. Instead, it asked me an entirely different question. What would you have done if she had tried to harm you? That woman? It did seem like she was going to do so. Is that so? Honestly, I had a feeling she was contemplating such things. The red within her told me so. In that moment, I did feel something cold reaching for my neck. But even then, I wasn't worried. Rather, I wished for her to touch me. That way, I would have been able to suppress most of her emotions using my emotive magic. Well, it's whatever. I know she'll come for me again. That much, I can tell. Feeling my feet sink deeper into the sand, I began walking again. Almighty stayed by my side, offering an extra layer of protection in case something I couldn't handle happened. At the same time, I pressed my hand against my thigh. Since I removed all feeling from my body. I can't stop here. I need to continue. I had a specific goal in mind, and I didn't plan on stopping. Right now, the one thing I needed most was to train and improve myself. Walking ahead, a series of notifications flashed across my darkened vision. Just like that, time flew by. In that time, I dreamt a lot. I had a lot of dreams. But, for whatever reason, I kept forgetting each dream, only tiny snippets slipping into my mind as I continued to train. I completely lost track of time as I navigated through the desert and fulfilled my duties, my skills improving with each passing day while also absorbing even more blood from the monsters, and filling the gaps in the rune contained within it. Time flowed. 3 months passed like this. Chapter 869. Dune Conqueror 1. The cheers were loud. HAA. HAA. so loud they nearly drowned out every other small sound around. And beyond the noise, a scorching heat lingered in the air, hovering over everything and leaving it all warm. Dark red stained the ground as a figure stood before it, his hand raised in the air as the cheers swelled louder around him. A loud drumming rose beneath the cheers, making it hard to make out what they were trying to say. But if one strained their ears enough, they'd hear it. The whom they were cheering for. Tharvek, Tharvek, Tharvek. Swoosh. In all my time outside the gates of the city, the storm never ceased. The heat lingered constantly, making prolonged exposure increasingly difficult. Though the clothes offered some protection, one simply couldn't rely on them to endure the relentless heat. Added to the numerous monsters that crawled the space, and this place was no different from hell. It's no wonder things are so strict and harsh in the city. There was hardly any food or water. Resources were scarce, and so was the space inside the city. You're finally back. A deep voice greeted me at the entrance of the gate. He was Murak, another one of the guards that I had worked with over the past several months. His features were hidden beneath his suit, but through the narrow gap in his eyes, I could see a long scar tracing down his face. The commander has asked for you. The commander? Having gotten used to this place, I could now more or less speak the language, albeit not fluently. Yes, he has asked for you. I see. I nodded. I could more or less see where this was going. Without lingering any further, I stepped forward. The gigantic gates rumbled as they slowly opened, their heavy mechanisms grinding against the stone. A wave of heat and dust shifted with their movement, brushing past me as the path cleared. I walked through without hesitation, crossing the threshold as the city finally welcomed me inside. Honestly, it feels weird to see and speak again. I touched my face as I moved forward. For the past several months, I had been navigating the world in complete darkness and silence. At some point, I had even severed my sense of taste, smell, and touch. The only way I was able to communicate was through Almighty, who helped me interact with the other guards and the commander when needed. Thankfully, it wasn't often since my language wasn't very good. I'm here. The office was located near the pillar, just outside the metal fences, inside a well-maintained multi-story building. People dressed in uniforms similar to mine moved in and out of the building. As I reached the main entrance, I gave the lobby a quick scan before letting my gaze settle on a particular room. This was my first time seeing this place, but I had already been here as I reached for the door and slowly opened it, revealing a moderately sized room. Sitting within was a large man with a shaven head and thick brows. His frame was broad and imposing, his presence filling the space. Though he wasn't threatening to me, I could clearly feel the power radiating from him. You're here. His deep voice rumbled throughout the room as I stood near the door, back straight. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on a sword in his grasp. Do you know why I called you here? Promotion. The commander paused, his head lifting to stare at me and revealing his deep red eyes. Silence followed for a brief moment before his lips pulled into a smile. Looks like you're aware. He placed the sword on the wooden table in the room. You are a fine warrior. In all my years here, it's been a long time since I've met someone as talented as you. Since your arrival, the number of fatalities among the wardens has dropped significantly, and the number of worms we've been able to eliminate has nearly doubled compared to last year. If you wanted to, you could have applied for the ranking battles. Why haven't you? Do you care not for honor? Not for me. I see. The commander traced his finger along the metallic surface of the blade. I won't question your decision. Everyone has their own path and I won't force you. In truth, I would much rather have you remain with us. But your performance has already drawn the attention of those above. Those from above? My heart skipped a beat, my body tensing slightly. Although my performances have been great, they shouldn't be to the point where I'd attract the eyes of those from above. Something is up. Have I been caught? There's no need to be tense. The commander laughed, as if noticing the subtle shift in my demeanor. I understand where you're coming from, but this promotion isn't quite what you think. You could say you've gotten lucky to some extent. With the recent loss of his private guards, he requires new ones. I recommended you. He? Who was he? Tharvek. The commander spoke solemnly, his hand leaving the blade as a sudden tightness formed in my chest. The Dune Conqueror. Sunscour Arena. Boom! Cheers thundered from every direction. Standing at the center of the arena, two warriors clashed, their bodies colliding as blood sprayed across the ground. The cheers grew louder as the fight dragged on, and even more blood spilled onto the arena. Despite all the cheers, a certain area remained quiet. High above the arena, on a private platform, a figure reclined on a large red sofa. His chin rested against his fist, grayish hair falling loosely across his face, as his drooping eyes watched the scene unfolding below. Suddenly, his lips parted. Hey! To whom he was talking, nobody knew. Do you think anyone beneath is a threat to me? His words were met with silence. And when he turned his head, he realized why. Oh, right. They're dead. Tharvek's attention returned to the fight below. The longer he watched, the heavier his eyelids grew. Though he had asked the question, he already knew the answer. Neither of the two contestants posed any real threat to him. His eyes eventually closed as he took a deep breath, taking in the heavy scent of blood as images lingered in his mind. He was once like them. He was once a warrior who clawed his way all the way to the top. And now, there was hardly anyone who dared challenge for his position. Well, there does seem to be one guy. Opening his eyes again, Tharvek's gaze drifted toward the opposite side of the arena, where another elevated platform stood. Seated upon a lavish chair was an old man with a long beard, his unfocused eyes fixed on the battle below. But as if sensing the shift in attention, the old man slowly raised his head. Their gazes met, and Tharvek smiled widely. The old man merely harumphed before returning his attention to the fight. At the same time, Tharvek sensed something behind him. He turned his head, his brows lifting slightly as several figures appeared. Ho ho! His gaze settled on one particular person, and a smile spread across his face. Rising from his seat, his pristine white robes draped down as he extended both hands forward. If it isn't the commander. I haven't seen you in a long time. How are you doing? I am doing well, Commander Rain answered, rubbing the back of his head as he pointed at the 5 people standing next to him. As you've requested, I've gathered 5 fine warriors. They will serve you as proper guards from this point forward. Excellent. Tharvek's smile widened as he took a closer look at the guards. The more he looked at them, the more satisfied he became. Yes, these guys will do. I quite like them. Oh? Suddenly, his gaze shifted to a particular guard. Though the man's features were concealed, leaving only his amber eyes visible, Tharvek sensed something unusual about him. This guy? Haha, looks like you've noticed. Laughing, the commander placed his hand over Julian's shoulder. This one here is one of the more talented guards that I've met in a while. In fact, he's so good that I almost feel pity giving him away. However, considering our relationship, I decided to give him away. You owe me a lot. Is that so? Tharvek looked at the guard up and down before nodding in satisfaction. The more I look at him, the more I like him. You've done a good job, Commander. This will certainly make things less troublesome in the future. Haha. Given our relationship, this much is nothing. The commander laughed once more, his voice booming across the platform before suddenly getting drowned out by the noise around them. Oh, looks like the fight is over. Tharvek turned his attention back toward the arena. His gaze settled on the lone figure still standing, hands gripping a severed head, its spine still trailing from it as blood poured down from above. Excellent. Tharvek cheered, looking at the grotesque scene beneath. That was a fine performance. Reaching for his pocket, he retrieved a certain vial and tossed it down to the winning warrior. Congratulations on your victory. That was a well-earned reward. The crowd erupted in cheers from every direction, chanting the name of the victorious warrior. The fervor was overwhelming, and as Tharvek looked around, he found himself intoxicated by the atmosphere. He was completely different compared to when the fight had begun. Clapping loudly, he continued to look at the arena as the warrior was soon escorted out of the area, and silence swept the place. Tharvek proceeded to sit down in his seat, his gaze once again falling on the old man on the opposite side as the old man stood up and his deep voice reverberated throughout. Let the next entrant step forward. The metal gates at the far end of the Sunscour arena opened, and 2 figures appeared on both sides, the audience exploding into cheers once more. Gorian, 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 Ryzen, Ryzen. As the 2 new entrants stepped into view, Tharvek's smile shifted into something more peculiar, his gaze settling on Ryzen. He stood a head shorter than Gorian, but that did little to diminish his presence. Like Gorian, he was one of the newest members in the rankings, someone who had risen with startling speed. As Tharvek's gaze settled on him, he turned his head toward his guards. His eyes lingered on one in particular as he called out to him. Hey! His voice was soft, and yet, despite the chaos around, it made its way to the guard who turned his head. For a brief moment, nothing else seemed to exist as their eyes met. Then Tharvek spoke. Do you think anyone beneath is a threat to me? Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.